Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku was the focus of Kacchan's master plan? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. War doesn't end all problems. If it had, world peace would have been obtained decades ago. 6 years ago, the monstrous threat that was Tamura Shigaraki was defeated, ending one of the worst eras for the new Quirk-ridden world Japan had seen. Slowly but surely, everything started to return to normality. Businesses and schools reopened. Neighborhoods were populated again. People smiled at each other on the street with no hint of ulterior motives. It seemed that those affected by the war could get back to their lives. But that couldn't be said about those who were directly involved in the war, those who fought, some until their last breaths, to bring down the unimaginable threat that compromised the safety of thousands, if not millions, of innocents. Trauma from the incident was in every one of their minds, whether they wanted to address it or not. Ultimately, they achieved their goal to. The threat was defeated, and those who survived could also integrate back into their previous way of life. Well, almost all of them. Despite the undeniable team effort it was to bring down Shigaraki, there would be no victory without the selflessness of one young boy, Izuku Midoriya. Through his unwavering fighting spirit, he managed to break through and defeat Shigaraki, at the ultimate cost of losing his own quirk, one for all. It had been a hard-fought battle for everyone involved, but they could all acknowledge that no one who survived had suffered more than Midoriya. Losing the one thing that gave him a chance to achieve his dream of being a hero was a tragedy. But he was so kind and thoughtful, and he never complained about it even though it was eating him up inside. After fully recovering, he and the now Class 2A returned to school, business as usual. On the outside, one might not be able to tell Midoriya had lost his power. After all, One for All was like a burning fire. He still had some embers to use up before it was entirely snuffed out. He was able to get through his second year of UA and barely made it to graduation with a small but bright spark of his quirk still fighting inside him. Ultimately, just like his predecessor, the embers would burn out eventually. It was unceremonious. It happened a few weeks after he enrolled in university. Midoriya had suspected his quirk would be leaving for good soon and knew that pursuing any career in the hero field was a waste of time. So, in university and with no reason to activate his quirk, he slowly felt it draining out of him. One day, he woke up, and what once was a burning flame was now a cold pile of ash. He'd completed his duty. One for All was gone. He told All Might first, who expressed his sympathies. He told Midoriya that it was okay to experience some form of grief, to mourn the great power he once had. But Midoriya had already come to terms with it, knowing that after the war, it'd be gone one day, and today just happened to be the day. Before hanging up, All Might had told him that he would always be there for him. He wasn't just a vessel, he wasn't only his successor anymore, he was family. Midoriya still couldn't believe how blessed he was. His number one idol was someone he considered to be a father figure. He wiped the small tears pooling in his eyes away before hanging up. His classmates were busy setting up their agencies and work, so he knew they'd be too occupied to be told this news in person. Luckily, they'd set up a group chat all the way back in their first year that was still going strong, so Midoriya typed in a message letting them know that One for All had left him. They were all so thoughtful, checking up on Midoriya and asking if they could help in any way. A few offered him spots in their agency as an assistant, but he had turned them down. There was no point pretending. But just before Midoriya pressed send, he felt there was someone else he had to talk to one-on-one about his quirk. He exited the chat app and scrolled through his contacts, clicking the call button on the person he'd been looking for. "Hey, Deku," came Bakugo's voice on the other end of the line. "Kacchan," Midoriya smiled. "How are you? Is Best Genus treating you well?" Midoriya and Bakugo had talked at length about what they would do after graduating. Midoriya was settled on going to university, studying hero history, which was funny, as he was now a big part of it himself. Bakugo had a million opportunities due to his performance in all 3 sports festivals and experiences as a student sidekick and, oh yeah, nearly dying in a literal war. It was safe to say he knew what he was doing. He wouldn't need a lot of training to work as a pro straight out of high school. But he and Best Jeanist worked together well and had developed a good relationship over the years, so when the pro invited Bakugo to his agency to get him a foot in the door and offered to help start up Bakugo's agency when he was ready, it was an opportunity Bakugo couldn't, and wouldn't, say no to. "He's fine," Bakugo replied, which was his way of saying the man was a good mentor and that his experience had been nothing less than perfect so far. "Everything all right? How are the embers?" Midoriya laughed softly. "Well, I'm okay too, thanks for asking." "I said everything all right," Bakugo scoffed. "You're included in that." Midoriya smiled. He was so happy that he had this kind of relationship with Bakugo now, one where they could banter back and forth and make fun of each other without worrying about any underlying feelings. Sure, sometimes Bakugo would take it too far, but Midoriya was getting better at reeling him in. And it wasn't like Bakugo had changed his entire personality. He was still hot-headed, rash, and temperamental. But there was a charm to that side of him, positive traits that meshed with the hot-headed part of his attitude. Plus, Midoriya had grown up with this personality. It would be weirder if Bakugo had done a 360 with his personality and became a perfect angel instead. The thought of it made Midoriya shudder a little. "I know, Kacchan. But the embers, that's why I'm calling you now," Midoriya said. "What's wrong with them?" Bakugo asked. Midoriya took a deep breath and unexpectedly felt a crashing wave of sadness wash over him. His voice got caught in his throat, and the words he had tried to say came out as a weird mix of a whimper and crying sound. "Deku? Yeah, right." Midoriya sniffed. Damn it, he had over a year to get used to the fact one for all was dying inside him, and he knew this day was coming. He knew it was coming. Was he crying? It's gone," he managed to whisper. He swallowed hard before speaking a little louder. "I don't have one for all anymore." Bakugo was quiet, and Midoriya listened intently for any noise he might make. His throat was closing up from how hard he was trying not to cry. Yes, he cried at everything. But he felt stupid for crying over something he knew was inevitable. He wasn't a kid anymore. But the sad, depressing part of his soul was shattered. His only dream, his blessing, was taken from him. He did everything right. He didn't deserve to end up powerless. But he had done it to save everyone, hadn't he? He never wanted to become a hero for recognition. He shouldn't be so selfish as to wish for it back. But what about the hard work he'd put in? All the training he'd put his body through? Was it all for no reason now, as he was left functionally quirkless? Midoriya already noticed he'd lost a lot of the muscle mass he'd built up now that he wasn't as active as he used to be. Tears fell down his cheeks. No matter how much he wiped his face with the back of his hand, they kept coming out. Bakugo was still silent. When Midoriya realized, he anxiously grabbed the phone, checking to ensure he hadn't accidentally hung up. No, he was still on the line. Hey, Kacchan? Are you okay?" Midoriya heard the slightest sound of a sniffle through the phone speaker, a sound which shocked him so much his chest ached, and his tears started pouring again. "Kacchan, are you crying? Oh my gosh, please don't be sad," he cried. It's okay. He knew this day was gonna come. And you can't get upset on my behalf, you dash. I'm coming over," Bakugo interrupted, and Midoriya heard the faintest hint of a voice crack. "I'll be there soon." "Wait, Kacchan, don't you have work to do?" "Jeanist will understand." Midoriya could hear him collecting his things. "Don't go anywhere, Deku. I'm on my way." "Kacchan," Midoriya heard the click of the phone and saw that he had been hung up on. He sighed. There was no way to change Bakugo's mind once he was set on something, a trait he shared with Midoriya. He sat down on his bed and went back into the group chat. The last message was a picture of Kaminari, Kirishima, Jai, Ishido, and Siro posing happily in front of the All Might statue. Midoriya smiled at the photo, then began typing his own message. Midoriya. "Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. I thought I'd just update you, I no longer have OFA. It's completely left my body, so I'm quirkless again. Please don't feel too bad. I knew this was coming, so I'm okay. Just thought you all would like to know, smiley face. Kaminari." Kirishima. "Dude, are you serious? That is his big time. I'm so sorry, man. Sad face. Uraraka. Oh Deku, I'm so sorry. 3 No one deserved to have had one for all more than you. I wish we could do something to get it back to you. Ishido. You're still a hero to us. Carrot, but I'm sorry to hear that. Let us know if you need someone to talk to, Midoriya. Ida. I'm very sorry to hear this, Midoriya. It's always been unfair that you'd have to go through this. I know it's not the same, but perhaps I could give you my brother's information, and you could talk to him about losing your quirk. Again, I'm very sorry, and I wish you the best, friend. Yairose. Please let us know if we can do anything to make it up to you, Midoriya. I'm so sorry to hear that. Todoroki. Midoriya, do you want to have lunch with us? We are all available if you need someone to talk to. Midoriya. I know you guys are all busy, so don't worry too much. Smiley face, but it would be nice to catch up soon. Just let me know when you are free, and we can arrange something. Kirishima. We'll always make time for you, man. Especially since this shitty thing happened, you can count on us. Uraraka. I'll send a picture of my schedule and we can see how we can all make time to see you, Deku. A knock at his door pulled Midoriya out of his phone, and he placed it on his desk as he got up and answered it. Bakugo stood in his hero costume, sans the gauntlets and neck brace. He really must have come right from Genus Agency. He was even breathing heavily. Did you run here? Midoriya asked nervously. No, Bakugo said. He paused and slightly averted his gaze. I flew. Midoriya sighed and couldn't help but chuckle. You didn't have to come. He stepped out of the doorway and invited Bakugo in. He sat on his chair as his guest sat on the freshly made bed. Midoriya's phone continued to buzz, so he turned it off entirely to be polite. Sorry, it's just the group chat, he said. I know. I saw your message. Alright. I didn't know you looked at it. I muted that sheet ages ago. I just noticed the last message was from you. The two boys were silent for a moment. So, it's really gone, huh? Midoriya's green eyes met Bakugo's crimson ones. Despite his voice on the phone, he didn't look too upset. It was more of a concerned look, as if he was worried the boy would shatter at the slightest bit of pressure. He couldn't blame Bakugo. Losing a quirk was like losing a limb to some people, metaphorically and literally in some cases. He couldn't be upset at people for thinking he was fragile in a moment like this. But he was stronger now. He wasn't going to break. Yeah. He took a deep breath. He didn't want to cry in front of Bakugo. Not because he didn't trust him or feel vulnerable enough to do so, but he really just didn't want to cry over this, despite it being something that no one would mock him for feeling upset over. Even the old Bakugo wasn't that cruel. It's a weird feeling. I've been clinging to these embers for a while since that's all that's left of One for All. And when I woke up today, it was just gone. I noticed instantly. It's just weird having something that was with me for so long to disappear completely. All Might only lasted, 5 years after his injury, right? Bakugo asked. You lasted 3 with just the embers. That's something. Yeah, but it was barely anything by our 3rd year. I have no idea how I even passed, Midoriya smiled sadly. They probably gave you a decent amount of leniency, seeing as you, saved the F&D world, Bakugo replied, sarcastic as ever. Midoriya chuckled. Wasn't just me. But, after graduation, I was forced to look the uncomfortable reality in the face. Despite everything I've worked for and given up, it's led me back to where I started. Quirkless. Deku, have your DMN ears stopped working too? Bakugo huffed. But just said you saved the world from Shigaraki. Yes, I heard you. Well, don't you dare forget it, Bakugo said firmly. His expression softened when he saw Midoriya's sad face. I'm reminding you that what you did was unbelievably selfless. You sometimes forget your own accomplishments, Deku. But if you have other feelings or whatever that you have to get off your chest, go ahead. Midoriya giggled again. I can't believe you're the one having this conversation with me. Bakugo got a little irritated. Well, didn't you see how many people are jumping out of their seats at the thought of catching up with you? Maybe you should go talk to them instead. Oh, come on, don't be like that, Midoriya pleaded. I'm just proud of you, how far you've come. And I'm glad we can actually have a real conversation. Bakugo scoffed. I haven't changed that much. I have no idea how to help you with your emotions, he said bluntly. You're good at muttering and spilling your guts, and I can listen, so if you just want to talk, do it. I thought my muttering annoyed you, Midoriya sighed. It does. Oh. But I think losing your power and coming to terms with it is more important. So go ahead and talk, nerd. I mean, I was already coming to terms with it since the day I lost it. I knew it would be gone someday, and it wasn't like it came out of nowhere. It's been getting weaker and weaker since graduation, and I've barely even used it since then. So yeah, I can't be a pro hero anymore. That dream is over. I don't think I regret being All Might's successor. I know that killing Shigaraki will be the main thing people remember about me, but there are so many people who look up to me now, and I want to do something to show I can be a good role model for them. Midoriya spun around in his chair and opened a drawer on his desk. He rummaged through the messy pile of papers before he found what he was looking for. I mean, I still get letters from Koda and Eri. And even though they always thank me for helping them, they also tell me about all the things going on in their lives, and I think that's so special. For example, did you know Eri has been learning the guitar for a couple of years now? She said she was inspired by our festival all those years ago. That's just so beautiful to me. And Koda, he says he's going to apply for UA when he's old enough, and he wants me to tell him all about it. I'm just so glad that people I helped get to live happy lives because, well, some heroes in the past never saw the people they saved as their own person, just someone in the line of fire. But the people we've saved all have their own lives and dreams, and that's why it's so important to protect them. Because, I dunno, I should be happy about all this, but dash. Midoriya's throat closed up again, and he swallowed the urge to cry once more. I can't deny that seeing you all my friends, just chase your dreams with no pushback. It does hurt, Kacchan. And it's selfish of me too. You're all wonderful and supportive, you all deserve to be heroes. And none of you have ever looked down on me for losing one for all. But some desperate part of me, the child in me still clinging to the thought of being a hero, wants to fight alongside you and be on the same level. I know it's impossible now. I accepted it then. I guess I just have to accept it now. Bakugo's phone suddenly vibrated in his pocket, and he fished it out to turn it off. He hadn't said a word during Midoriya's rambling. He just listened intensely. Midoriya suddenly shot out of his seat. Oh my gosh, I rambled so much. I'm so sorry, Kacchan. He apologized. You probably have so much work to do, I am probably ruining your day dash. Shut up, Deku, he exhorted. I told you to talk, and you did what I told you. Sit down, it's fine. And you're not ruining my day. You're probably having the worst day of anyone. But your phone dash? It's just Genist. But I told you, he'll understand when I come back and explain why I left. Bakugo sank back down on Midoriya's bed. Go on. Compared to other rambling I've sat through in our lives, this one wasn't even that bad. I don't really know what else to say. I think I said everything I wanted to already. Well, it sounds like you might have a new career in the bag anyway, Bakugo said. What? The blonde boy sighed heavily. I already told you I'm shit at helping you with your feelings. This isn't me being emotional or whatever. I'm just going to give you a suggestion that will help you. You should try to be a teacher at UA, Deku. Midoriya blinked. A teacher? I dunno, would it really be the right path for me now? You can teach these brats exactly what it means to be a hero and how much you must be willing to sacrifice to do so, Bakugo continued. You've got more experience than most pros wandering around right now. I guess so. Look at that. It really SCKS that you've lost one for all. I really thought we could be competing for number one forever, and now dash. Kacchan dash. Just let me finish, moron. We can't bring your Quirk back, but we all want you to find something you're passionate about. And if you like helping these kids so much, teach them about the real world of heroes. Put your experience to good use. Midoriya sat silently in his chair and let Bakugo's words sink in. He really could be a hero in some other way, couldn't he? He could raise the next generation of heroes the right way and teach them the things that mattered about hero work. Make sure no incidents like the war he'd gone through happened again. He'd had a conversation with Uraraka a few weeks prior about an idea she had relating to quirk counseling so children with quirks deemed less than suitable for society could learn how to control them and teach them they are more than what society says about their power. He'd encouraged her to pursue it, and here Bakugo was telling him to pursue another dream. In its own way, inspiring others in their hero work was pretty cool. I think Midoriya was interrupted by a knock at his door again, and he opened it to reveal Uraraka, Ida, Kirishima, and Yaoyorozu at the door. Midoriya, they cried in unison, leaping at their friend to give him a hug. He stumbled back, catching himself on the edge of his bed to stop himself from toppling. Deku, are you okay? Uraraka asked, pulling back. Sorry, we just wanted to see you. We would have brought more people, but they were too busy or out of the area. It's okay. You didn't have to come at all. Really? Midoriya sat back down in his chair, smiling at his friends. Dude, you lost your power, Kirishima said. That's a big deal, and we wanted to be here for you. I barely had any left, anyway. It's okay. The four of his friends looked at each other and at Midoriya in disbelief. They tried to think of anything to say to Midoriya before they were interrupted by a loud cough. Deku, I gotta head back to Genist, Bakugo said. All eyes were now on him, and the group of four started profusely apologizing simultaneously. Bakugo, we didn't even notice you were here. Yaoyorozu exclaimed. Sorry, Bakugo. Were you two in the middle of a conversation? Uraraka said regretfully. I apologize for entering so intrusively and without warning, Bakugo. We disrupted your privacy, and I ask for forgiveness. Ida apologized. Bakugo rolled his eyes. I don't care. Man, you were silent. Kirishima walked over to his friend and held out his hand. You came to talk to Midoriya too? Bakugo shook his hand quickly and then turned to leave. I've done all my talking. Deku can tell you what plans he has now since One for All is gone. He stood up and headed towards the door before pausing suddenly. Without looking back, he raised one arm and tightly squeezed Midoriya's shoulder. I should have said this earlier, Deku. I am sorry about your power. The door shut firmly, and Midoriya's eyes couldn't help but fill with tears. All he had wanted his whole life was for Bakugo to see him as an equal, respect him, and maybe even see him as a friend. He'd fought so hard, been through the lowest PRDS of both their lives, and seen every side of Bakugo, the good, bad and ugly. And they'd come out as friends. This was all he ever wanted out of their relationship, for them to have mutual respect and trust in each other. So when he started crying, his friends didn't need to comfort or ask him what was wrong. He was merely crying tears of pure joy. The five had a long heart-to-heart discussion about Midoriya's feelings and his future options. Midoriya brought up Bakugo's idea of going into teaching, which the others agreed with wholeheartedly. Midoriya tearfully shared his feelings of envy and loneliness with his friends, who were pro-heroes, but they reassured him that his feelings were more than valid and that they would never shove them in his face, not that he had any fear they would. They offered their support in any way they could and also shared the exciting news that Uraraka's quirk counseling idea had gotten some traction and that she, Yaoyorozu, Tsu and Ida were planning on becoming official teammates and could even be starting an agency together. What started off as a morning with nothing but bad news turned into a day with hopes for an exciting future. Midoriya's friends bid him farewell when they were done talking and promised to keep in touch. Midoriya sat at his desk and pulled out 3 pieces of paper to write 3 letters. The first, for Koda, to ask how he was, and to let him know he may be his teacher one day. The second, for All Might, to ask if he had free time to meet up and talk about this idea more in person. And the third and final, for Mr. Aizawa, his former teacher, to ask what steps he had to take in order to become a UA teacher. The intrusive beeping of an alarm clock woke Izuku from his peaceful sleep. He rolled over to the empty part of his bed and reached out to shut off the All Might-themed clock. Brushing his soft, green hair out of his face, Izuku rose from his bed and began getting ready for work. It was the second week into Izuku's second year as a UA teacher, and he was loving it more and more every day. He'd passed university with flying colors and didn't even have a day to himself before he got a call from Principal Nizu offering him a teaching job. He adored his students. They were so clever and full of potential. He admired them like he had his classmates when he was a UA student himself. Izuku still had many of his old habits, observing their quirks, discovering their strengths and weaknesses, and writing down all the knowledge he could gather from them in his trusty notebooks, which had grown into quite an extensive collection. Some of his notes even made it into the actual curriculum due to how in-depth they were. Sometimes, it did hurt Izuku's soul, knowing he could never pursue the path his students were on. His time as a hero had come and gone. But rather than being caught up in his self-pity, he always chose to push himself and think of new ways to help his students improve, using his experience to mold them into better heroes. He wanted to make sure every one of them would be a strong beacon of peace so that no terror on the same level as All for One or Shigaraki could occur again. Izuku thought about Shigaraki, or rather, he thought about Tenko Shimura, often. He recalled how hard he had tried to save the boy, a victim of the dark parts of hero society Izuku hadn't always cared to see. But now his eyes were open, and he knew they were heading towards a brighter future. Uraraka's Quirk counseling program was opened for children who were the next generation's Tenko Shimura or Himiko Toga. Children whose quirks weren't considered normal enough to be accepted into society. Izuku spoke with her over the phone every so often, and he praised her for her efforts, knowing she was an example of a true hero, always looking for someone to help out and make them smile. In fact, all his classmates' accomplishments seemed to point towards a brighter future for quirk-based society. Crime rates in Japan had lowered to what they were during All Might's prime, and the general public was more aware and educated on the dangers of quirk-based prejudice. They had also changed the stigma on what it meant to support a hero. No longer were the rankings set in stone and meant to promote hero worship. Rather, they showed which heroes were willing to help out everyday civilians, resolving more minor, humane problems, and not so much who can beat up the biggest bad guy. Izuku preferred it that way. It highlighted people who were heroes for the right reasons. Izuku pulled on his work clothes. Unlike his co-workers, who wore their hero costumes to teach, he felt more comfortable in a simple black blazer and pants. He still wore his trademark red shoes. Despite having adjusted to his adult life, they were one part of his childhood he still wanted to keep. Plus, they were comfortable, and who could argue with that? Izuku grabbed his red tie, his briefcase and keys and headed outside. It was still early, chilly, and with a slight dampness to the air. The sun just barely peeked over the horizon, and the street was quiet when Izuku crossed it. He walked into the building, up 2 floors, and reached the door he was looking for. Izuku took a deep breath. His friend could be pretty moody in the morning. He knocked on the door, not too loud to disturb the other residents but loud enough for the person inside to hear. He heard a muffled sound and stepped back as the door unlocked from the inside. "Morning, Kacchan," Izuku smiled. "Sorry if I woke you." Katsuki was still in his sleeping attire, a black tank top and black sweatpants. He rubbed his face and opened the door to let Izuku in. "Nah, I was about to hop in the shower," he yawned. "I'll be 10 minutes and then we can go." Izuku walked into Katsuki's nearly empty apartment, closing the door behind him, and Katsuki walked into the bathroom and shut the door. It was so strange. He'd been a high-earning pro hero for over 5 years. But when you saw his living space, that would not be the job you'd assume he had. Standing in the doorway, Izuku could see the tiny kitchen with just a microwave and fridge. Izuku let his curiosity get the better of him, and he opened the refrigerator, which was nearly empty save for a few bottles of milk. The pantry didn't fare any better. All they held were dozens of cups of instant ramen, which was all Katsuki ate when Izuku came over for lunch. He'd always have to turn it down for himself because he wasn't accustomed to the overwhelming spice in the ramen Katsuki bought. There was a single table with 2 chairs where the living space was, a couch and a worn-down rug on the floor. The space was, in a word, plain. Nothing on the wall, no showings of personality. Izuku wandered around the apartment as he heard the shower start and peeked into Katsuki's room. The bareness of the place didn't stop there, as all that was in the pro's room was a bed, a bookshelf, a messy desk with paper strewn everywhere, and his sleeping computer. In fact, The only things that weren't an absolute necessity in Katsuki's room were 3 figurines that sat atop his desk, which were Christmas gifts from Izuku and Kirishima a few years ago. They'd both conspired to get Katsuki the rarest variants of all their unique hero figures, so now Katsuki had Deku, Dynamite and Red Riot figures worth a couple 100,000 yen casually chilling on his desk. The sliding door to the wardrobe revealed many of the same clothes he'd just seen Katsuki wearing, black shirts and tank tops, and in the small dresser that barely fit in the space were less than 5 pairs of pants. His spare hero costume was also hanging up, which always made Izuku happy to see. Even if he saw it every day, it filled him with a sort of nostalgia to see it not be worn by his friend. Snooping around as usual, Deku? Came Katsuki's voice. Izuku jumped, not even having noticed the water stop running. Katsuki stood in the doorway with wet hair and his hero costume on, only missing the boots. His neck brace and gauntlets were always kept at the agency to reduce the hassle it was to drag them along on public transport. Sorry, Kacchan. Izuku squeaked. I was just... He paused, then felt a mischievous grin spread across his face. I was just wondering how you live with so little in your possession, he giggled. I don't think anyone who would see your house would think you're a pro hero from how you decorate. Shut your mouth, Deku, Katsuki grumbled. It's too early to deal with your sheet. And I don't give a f about decor. I don't need a bunch of random junk cluttering my house. But you don't even have a TV, Kacchan. I watch all the shit I need to on my FING computer, alright? Katsuki grabbed Izuku's shoulders and moved him out of his room. Just keep your crappy opinions to yourself for 2 minutes, and I'll be ready to go, alright Deku? Izuku smiled as the bedroom door was shut in his face. It was fun to rile up his friend when he knew it wouldn't end in an explosive argument. He always knew Katsuki would never go too far. He hadn't even held Izuku's shoulders hard enough to leave marks when he pushed him out of the room. They felt safe around each other. It was weird to think about, sometimes. 10 years ago, Katsuki would have blown Izuku to smithereens for even thinking about snooping around in his room, not that Izuku had even been invited to his house since they were children, and Izuku would have been too nervous at Katsuki's reaction to engage in any sort of banter with him. Now, making fun of Katsuki was commonplace in their conversations, and despite always retorting back, he probably felt Izuku deserved more than a few chances to tease him back after all that Katsuki did to him. Izuku barely thought about the low part of their relationship. It was all in the past, and there was no point thinking about something that would only ruin his mood if he dwelled on it too much. Katsuki had apologized and shown genuine change, and there was no point in dredging up the past if there was no reason to. He was still the same person at heart too, which made it all the better. Izuku truly considered Katsuki to be his closest friend now. He still spoke to his classmates. They kept in touch through messages and occasionally met up for lunches, but their days off rarely fell on the same day. It was getting harder and harder to see each other, but Izuku felt happy knowing that the reason for that was them progressing their careers and helping others as heroes. But because of this, Katsuki was the person he saw most often by a mile. It, of course, helped that he only lived across the street. The door to Katsuki's room opened, and Izuku smiled at the sight of him. It always filled him with pride to see his childhood friend finally living his dream. He knew how much work Katsuki had done to get to this point, not just all the hard work and training Yue put them through, but also having to regain the strength of his right arm. Izuku recalled memories of him and Katsuki's other friends eagerly cheering him on when the boy managed to reach a new milestone in his rehabilitation plan. Nowadays, his right arm was back to normal and hardly ever gave him issues, although he did have to keep it in the back of his mind to be extra careful when using powerful attacks. Katsuki adjusted the hearing aid in his left ear and met Izuku's eyes. "Alright, do you have it?" Izuku reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out his red tie, placing it in Katsuki's outstretched hand. "I really should learn how to do this myself." "Shut up. I do it better than you do anyway." Katsuki unfolded the tie. He looked at Izuku and rolled his eyes. "Blazer? Oh right." Izuku pulled off the black blazer, folding it up quickly and holding it over his arm. Katsuki adjusted the white collar of Izuku's shirt and looped the tie around his neck. Izuku could see his concentration in his deep red eyes and feel Katsuki's exhalation on his face. They both grew a little after the war, but now Katsuki clearly stood a few inches taller than him. Before, he could reach eye level with him, but now, Izuku had to tilt his head up in order to maintain eye contact. Silently, Katsuki tied the red fabric up, ending it by pulling the knot of the tie up to Izuku's collarbone. He took a step back and smirked. "You're welcome." He opened the door and let Izuku leave first, locking the apartment door behind him. "Thanks, Kacchan." Izuku hurriedly pulled on his blazer again, and Katsuki turned him around, frowned, and adjusted it. Izuku blushed before following his friend down the stairs and onto the street. The walk to the train station wasn't long, but it was still early, and he was shivering a little. "Cold?" Katsuki asked, not bothered. His hero costume covered all of him except his face and was made to reflect heat from his body so he could produce the sweat required for his quirk. It helped keep him warm, too, something that Izuku's simple shirt and blazer struggled with. "A little," Izuku confessed. "We're nearly there, though, so I'll be all right." Katsuki scoffed. "Do you want to get a scarf or something? You won't be any use to your students if you wind up getting sick." "He got a scarf," Izuku said. "Besides, it'll start warming up soon, so it's fine." "Don't put this oh-so-noble act on," Katsuki sneered. "If you're cold, then you're FING cold. Wear a scarf tomorrow, moron." "It's not an act," Izuku mumbled. "It's just dash." He paused and felt the heat rush to his face. "What?" Izuku averted his eyes from Katsuki as much as he could. "It's embarrassing. The only scarf I have is that super multicolored one. It'll clash if I wear it with my work clothes." Katsuki looked down at Izuku before letting out a slight chuckle. "Oh, but you can still wear those dumb bright red shoes to work every day?" Izuku's head snapped up. "Teet, that's different. Don't make fun of those, Kacchan. They're my favorite and they're comfortable." "Oh, come on. They're like 10 years old by now. How have they not fallen apart?" "Oh, I didn't only have one pair," mumbled Izuku, bright red. Katsuki threw his head back and started laughing. "Oh my god, you are such a loser. You had multiple pairs of those stupid but shoes." "Kacchan." Izuku whined, but Katsuki could see he was fighting back his own laughter. "Stop making fun of me." "No way, Deku." "Kacchan, I don't make fun of you for having the same costume since high school. That's because my costume's awesome. So are my shoes." Katsuki collected himself, a wide smile still plastered across his face. "Just ditch the red shoes, They're pretty lame. You don't look like a teacher, you look like a clown." "But I like them, Kacchan." Izuku protested. "My students think they look cool." That was the wrong thing to say. Katsuki burst out laughing again, trying hard to continue walking straight while he cackled, ignoring the strange looks he was getting from people passing them. "Kacchan. Deku, your students are all like 15 years old. Why would you take their opinion seriously?" "That's mean." Izuku cried. "I care about their opinions. Maybe over nerd sheet, but you should definitely listen to me on this matter, Deku," Katsuki snickered. Izuku rolled his eyes. Whatever. They had reached the station now, and the train was only a few minutes away. The two of them sat down on a bench alone. It was too early for anyone to be on the platform with them. "Hey, Deku," Katsuki said, having calmed down from the laughter. "The shoes, they're fine, all right? But it doesn't make sense to be insecure over a brightly colored scarf when you have those on your feet. So if you're cold, just wear it, all right, nerd." Izuku smiled softly and nodded. That was the Kacchan he knew. "All right. But really, we're nearly in summer, so it's not a big dash. If you don't wear that scarf tomorrow, I'm not doing your tie," Katsuki interrupted, dead serious. "What dash? You'll have to go to work with that pitiful attempt at a knot, Deku. Do you want that?" Izuku shook his head, and Katsuki smirked. "Good." The train ride was only half an hour long, and both Izuku and Katsuki attempted to get a few minutes of sleep during that time. By the time their stop came, they were groggy and tired again, having to stretch out to wake up from their short nap. The two of them walked until reaching a crossroad, the left path leading to UA High School and the right leading to the city, which, 5 years ago, opened up an agency founded by Dynamite. Izuku bid his friend well as he walked up the path to UA as he had done so many times as a student. It was nice to see how the school hadn't changed and how it had recovered so seamlessly from the attack 8 years ago. Izuku shook the thought from his head and walked through the silent hallway. Of course, it was still too early for any student to arrive, so Izuku went straight to the staff room to get some work done before the school day started. Izuku was the homeroom teacher for the Hero Course Class 1B, and he also worked alongside Aizawa as the Hero Course supervisor to train the next generation of heroes, especially since the margin of acceptance was getting smaller as the years passed and the presence of villains dwindled. His analysis and observations were crucial for the students, who looked up to him as an excellent educator, able to identify their quirks, strengths, and weaknesses and suggest ways to make up for their blind spots. Izuku sat down at his desk and started working on the pile of papers that he'd brought with him in his briefcase. It was an assignment he had given to his students during the first week before any physical quirk tests started. He had asked them to write a short paper on why they wanted to become heroes and what type of hero they wanted to become. He'd purposely not looked at them until the second week so he could unbiasedly form his own image of his students and then compare that with what they had written about themselves. Izuku read his students' papers and compared them with his notes, creating new images in his head of what he should assist each student with. He had read through 2 of his students' papers when he heard the staff door open. "Good morning, Midoriya." Izuku was greeted by the tired face of his former teacher, Aizawa. He offered a small wave and a smile to the tired man, who merely nodded his head in acknowledgement before sitting down at his own desk. Since becoming co-workers, they became closer as friends, which started out a little awkward. Aizawa always told Izuku that receiving his letter asking how to get into UA as a teacher was a shock, but he was happy to give him a hand. He agreed that his vast knowledge and experience would help young hero students grow and that he could teach them well. But Izuku could tell Aizawa was a little stuck on how to treat his former student, who was now a full-on educator. As for Izuku, he had a bad habit of referring to Aizawa as "sir," despite being on the same level. The time ticked away, and soon, Izuku was wrapping up his work and preparing to leave for his classroom. Aizawa was ready to leave before him and hovered over his shoulder to see what he was doing. "Working hard, Midoriya?" he asked. Izuku turned to look up at him. "Was our handwriting this bad when you were our teacher, sir?" "No. Oh dash. It was worse. Especially yours. Your muttering habit comes through in your writing too." "Ah. That Bakugo of yours had atrocious writing too, except when it came to actual exams. I couldn't understand it." "I see." Izuku returned to his papers, ready to pack them into his briefcase. Then he paused and turned around. "Wait, what do you mean by of mine?" But Aizawa had already left the room. Despite loving his job, Izuku couldn't deny that it took a lot out of him. That's why he couldn't be happier packing up his things and heading home when the final bell rang. He waved goodbye to passing students as he walked through the hallways, heading towards the giant gate he'd seen so many times before. Izuku made a quick stop at a coffee shop to grab 2 cups before walking to the Dynamite agency, which was closing shortly, too. He waved hello to the secretary, who had special instructions from the hero in charge to let that nerd with green eyes and freckles into the staff door with no issues. Izuku knocked on Katsuki's office and smiled when he saw his friend. "Did you have a good day, Kacchan?" Izuku asked, handing him one of the 2 cups. Katsuki took the cup and swallowed the drink in one go before handing the now empty cup back to Izuku, who was stunned. That was piping hot dash." "My day was fine, Deku," he interrupted. "What about you? Get sick of those teenage brats yet?" "Don't call my students brats, Kacchan," Izuku said sternly. "I don't call your sidekicks any names like that." "Yeah, because only I'm allowed to call them names," Katsuki grinned. Izuku raised an eyebrow at him. "Okay, sensei, I won't call them that." "Thank you." Izuku took a slow sip of his own coffee and threw Katsuki's empty one into the bin. "My day was great, actually. I've been working on reading these papers I assigned. They're about knowing what type of hero you want to become. It's always fun getting to know a new group of kids. Although dash. Talk and walk, Deku," said Katsuki, putting his gauntlets into their spots and turning off the lights in his office. I want to get out of here. Right. So, anyway, it is a new group, but guess who I have in my class? Who? Koda. He's so grown up now. It was such a joy seeing him on the first day, and now I get to teach him everything he needs to know to become a hero like his parents. I'm so proud of him. He's already doing well too. That's the bra. Izuku glared at him. The kid related those bonkers cat ladies, isn't it? The pussycats, yes. But all my kids are amazing. I think you should come in as a special guest one day and meet them, Kacchan. No, thank you, Deku, Katsuki huffed. He shut the door to the agency, and the two started walking on the streets. I'm not cut out for the teaching thing. Oh, come on. Izuku insisted. A lot of our other classmates came in to talk to them last year. Plus, the school pays you for your time, so it won't be a problem for you to skip a patrol. How much we talking? Katsuki grinned. Kacchan. Look, Deku, I really don't know what I would even teach them. How to blow sheet up. No, I could create a lesson plan and dash. Okay, it's officially a no. I'm not following your lesson plans. Izuku frowned. My lesson plans are actually pretty good, you know. Is that so? Yes. They're in a lot of the new curriculum. Because of all the note-taking I've done. Katsuki paused. I didn't know that. I didn't think you'd care. The two of them walked the rest of the way to the train station in silence. Izuku brought out some of his work to do on the train so Katsuki didn't distract him and kept silent. When they got off at their station, they didn't speak until they reached their apartments. Izuku turned to Katsuki with a reserved smile. I'll see you tomorrow, Kacchan. Good night. He didn't look back as he walked into his apartment building. He reached his door and unlocked it. He was in the middle of swapping his shoes for his slippers when he felt his phone buzz. Kacchan. I'll think about the lesson thing. Kacchan. Sorry if I was a D. Izuku smiled. It was a nice message to read. Middle school Katsuki would have rather plucked his own eyeball out than issue an apology, so Izuku always felt a little bit better when he received one. It's okay, smiley face, have a think about it, we've got the whole school year after all. Yes, he still used emoticons 6 years after school. Izuku pulled off his blazer and undid his tie, leaving both hanging up on the coat rack near his door. He put all his schoolwork on his desk and started preparing his dinner. It was a little too quiet for his liking, so he threw on the TV and let a random channel play, not paying too much attention to it. He just liked the background noise. Living alone was a new concept for Izuku, of course. He'd lived with his mother his whole life and had never known anything different until he was forced to move into the UA dorms. It was a big change, but nothing compared to leaving home, buying an apartment, and taking care of all his responsibilities alone. Izuku had never dreamed of becoming a hero for the money. He never wanted absurd fame or recognition. He just wanted to help and save others. However, due to his efforts in the war, he was awarded a significant amount of money as repayment. Of course, what he wanted more than anything was for his quirks to be returned so he could continue being a hero, but since that couldn't be achieved through money, he and his mother humbly accepted it and put it towards his university studies. After Izuku had graduated, he had a large chunk of the money left and decided to use the majority of it by buying and owning an apartment not too far from his job but not too far from his mother either. He had savings left over but still worked hard as a teacher to make ends meet by being smart with his money. With all this in mind, Izuku couldn't help but think about Katsuki. When Izuku spotted the Bakugo across the street with moving boxes in hand, he couldn't believe his eyes. After rushing over, he learned that Katsuki had bought an apartment in the complex directly opposite him. It was such a strange decision to him, but it would have been rude to question it straight to his face, so he kept his confusion to himself. He couldn't help but have a lot of conflicting thoughts about it. On one hand, he was overjoyed that he would be able to see Katsuki more often. At that point, he had been a pro for around 6 months, and his earnings were nothing to scoff at. So Izuku couldn't think of a logical reason why his childhood friend, who had well-off parents and an agency in the city, had moved into this small, humble neighborhood. Why wasn't he off living in the busy city? And when he saw how frugally he lived, it raised more questions than answers. Was he putting all of his paychecks into savings? What was he saving up for? Despite their relationship developing, Izuku sometimes found Katsuki as hard to read as ever. He always wanted to ask about it but never found a way to do so that wouldn't come across as rude or intrusive, so he kept it to himself. At least he got to see him nearly every day. Their routine was something Izuku was over the moon about, and he wasn't about to ruin it with questions that weren't any of his business. So he continued to think about Katsuki, excited to see him the following day. Katsuki put his phone on the table and sighed. It seemed no matter how hard he tried to be on his best behavior around Deku, he always had to go say something to F it up. He wanted to be more involved in Deku's life. He would tolerate his long ramblings about his students and all their new quirks that he had never heard of before if it meant he could spend another second with Deku. But of course, Katsuki had to go and ruin it by implying that he didn't care about all of Deku's research and analysis. Katsuki wrote a message to Deku, apologizing for dismissing him. It wasn't much at all, but it was the best he could do. He was just never good at expressing anything really. Except anger, he was good at that. Deku replied almost instantly, and Katsuki's stomach filled with a terrible feeling. Why did that idiot feel inclined to forgive him for everything so fast? Deku was a better person than he was because if someone had treated him the way he treated Deku, they'd be ash in the ground by now. Katsuki felt like he deserved more pushback, that Deku should force him to prove his remorse. But he never did. And Katsuki realized long ago that if he wanted that feeling to go away, he'd have to put in the effort of making it up to Deku himself without any prompting. The new routine that they had every day was something Katsuki was happy about. Wake up, greet Deku, shower, tie Deku's tie, catch the train, do hero work all day, have coffee with Deku, catch the train home, repeat. In a profession where no 2 days of work were the same, having something consistent outside of work kept his life steady. Sunday was the only day Katsuki and Deku couldn't see each other, as Deku had no reason to go to UA and mostly used that day to catch up on work. Likewise, weekends were always busy for heroes, so it was one day that Katsuki didn't see him. The growling of Katsuki's stomach was a signal to him to get off his butt and start getting some stuff done. He walked into his kitchen, which was so small he could touch either side of the wall when he spread his hands out. He reached in and grabbed a cup of instant ramen, filled it with water, and chucked it in the microwave. While he waited, he quickly went into his room and turned on his computer. He had some calls to make tonight, even though he didn't really feel like talking to anyone. As his computer booted up, the microwave beeped, and Katsuki headed back to drain most of the water, throw in the spicy seasoning, and stir it. Ramen was pretty much all he ate. It was cheap and easy to make, plus it usually filled him up well enough for the day to get by. He drained the rest of the water and took his food to his room, shutting the door behind him. The computer was on now, and the blinking notifications showed that someone was trying to get in contact with Katsuki. With his chopsticks and ramen in one hand, he clicked on the app that was begging for his attention and saw 2 messages. Kacchan, can you hop on call please easy? Hi Bakugo. Please join Kacchan and me on our video call when you get home. Katsuki moved his cursor over to the video call app, which had been developed specifically for the 3 of them so there was no chance of any interference or information leaks. After a few seconds of connecting, Bakugo was looking at the bright faces of Mei Kacchan and Melissa Shield on a video call. Hi Bakugo, greeted both girls in unison. Melissa looked to be at her desk, while Kacchan's camera was set up on a tripod, and Katsuki could see her working on something out of focus. Hey, he said. What did you need me for? Kacchan walked over from what she had been working on and into the frame. As expected, she was covered in grime from nearly head to toe. Her bright pink hair was tied back into a tight ponytail, and she had a headband on to ensure no strands would fall into her face. She put her wrench down and stood in front of the tripod camera. Just updating you on the newest advancements after months of hard work, Kacchan announced. Melissa's DLVRY of the prototype Black Whip mechanisms came in, and I've been hard at work affixing them to the practice suit and seeing if they work. Black Whip was one of the harder quirks to adapt, Melissa smiled. I'm glad we have found a way to make it work, but it might need a few more adjustments. This was the most significant thing going on in Katsuki's life. In university, when Deku lost One for All, he had talked with him about it at length. Well, actually, Deku talked, and all Katsuki really did was listen. And while he listened, he felt angry. Angry that his rival, the one person he wanted to compete with for the rest of his life, was now out of the competition. And it wasn't because Katsuki was better than him. Deku had been unfairly pulled out of the race. Life as a pro without Deku on his heels didn't sound like a life he wanted to live. But what could he do? It was like All Might's retirement. He used up the rest of the embers of One for All's power, and then he was done. Effectively quirkless. But then Katsuki had an idea, a brainwave. All Might, he'd used a mech suit in the war to fight All for One, hadn't he? And it had very nearly worked. He knew if he tried to use that suit on literally anyone other than All for One, they would have been thwarted instantly. And yes, the suit cost an unfathomable amount of money to build. Even if Katsuki became the #1 hero right off the bat, he'd still have to save for years and years to get the funding for it. But could he do it if he could get people on board, others who knew how deserving Deku was to be a hero? Could he get his rival, someone with the heart of a true hero, back on the field? He had some doubts about it at first. Would Deku feel like they were pitying him? Hey, you quirkless loser, take this ridiculously expensive support item and come be a hero. But you're not even using real power, just a sophisticated piece of tech. Doesn't that make you feel good about yourself? Katsuki chose to ignore the insecure part of his mind. Deku never became a hero because he felt he had an extraordinary power to show off. He wasn't someone who did good deeds to get praise from them. He was a hero not because of his quirk, but because of his heart. It didn't matter if his powers were artificial. He deserved to be someone who could save civilians and see the gratitude in their eyes as he did. So Katsuki decided to call All Might and propose the plan to him. Soon enough, the project was in motion, and the retired hero brought in 2 engineers who would start the project by brainstorming. The first was Mei Hatsum, Katsuki's classmate at UA. She was a little weird and not someone he pictured himself hanging around a lot, but she was passionate and an undeniable genius when it came to inventions. When he met her in person for the first time, she'd even offered to upgrade his hearing aid for no extra fee, saying his old one was so retro. The second person involved with the project was the daughter of one of All Might's friends, Melissa Shield, who Katsuki had met very briefly as a teenager. She resided in America now, and was the one who created the armored suit All Might had used in the war, so she already had an insight into what Katsuki wanted to make for Deku. Katsuki assigned himself as head of the operation, and once the planning had been finalized between the three, the uncomfortable question of how much it would cost came up. The girls were hesitant to tell him, worried that it would discourage Katsuki due to the overwhelming price. But he told them he would pay whatever if it meant they could bring the suit to life. It didn't make the blow of the enormous price tag any softer, but if there was one thing Katsuki was good at, it was not giving up. So, as soon as the project was approved, he started putting 80% of his paycheck into funding Deku's suit. He wasn't where he wanted to be on the ranking charts, but if it gave him high enough earnings to save up for the suit and live semi-comfortably, he was okay with it. There were technically 2 versions of the suit, one in Japan and one in America. The one in Japan that Hatsum worked on was more of a beta version. She would make simple adjustments and improve on Melissa's notes, then send back prototypes for Melissa to develop into the final product. Once a year, he, All Might and Hatsum would go to America to see it in person. He'd seen it 5 times so far, and this year would be the 6th. 6 years of shelving his childhood goal, being the #1 hero, for the sake of Deku returning to hero work. Hatsum and Melissa weren't the only people who were helping out with the suit. It was clear that Katsuki couldn't fund the entire thing alone, unless he wanted Deku to start being a hero again in his 70s. He was earning a lot, but the suit required a lot of technological research and funding if it was going to act exactly as One for All had while wielded by Deku. And Katsuki refused to give him some half-butted suit. If he was doing it properly. So, secretly he had created a group chat with all his classmates from 1A, explaining the situation to them and asking if they would be willing to help out financially. It was a total secret from Deku. He forbade anyone from mentioning it to him at all and threatened to murder them if they even hinted anything at him. Everyone was overjoyed at the thought of Deku being able to resume hero work, and after everyone was on board, they each told Katsuki how much they'd be willing to pitch in. After some rough calculations, Katsuki, Melissa and Hatsum estimated it wouldn't take more than 8 years to get the suit complete and working. 8 years. It was going to take a while. But it was better than nothing. Katsuki would have settled for nothing less than perfection, so it would have to do. And meanwhile, Katsuki worked hard as a hero to earn as much as he could. He had initially wanted nothing but fame and riches when he was a teenager, but now he wanted it for a different reason. He wanted Deku to be a hero alongside him. So, while he was not striving for number one, he still performed well as a hero most of the time. He was still the same guy, after all. Some people just managed to get on his nerves and PSS him off, and he couldn't help himself when he snapped at them. Besides, there would be no satisfaction if he reached number one without Deku. He needed a good opponent in order to feel his victory was earned. Katsuki had zoned out on the call, and Melissa and Hatsum were talking amongst themselves. He started paying attention again, and the girls were discussing the properties of Black Whip. That even the smallest movement of the knuckles is causing the wires to shoot out. Hatsum gushed. These tricky little things are giving me a real challenge. You've nearly got it, Hatsum. Melissa replied. Once you get them perfected, I can start working on adjusting their visual. I've already got a good prototype for how it used to look. She held 2 small devices in her hands, which projected 2 holograms of dark energy in front of her. Hey, Bakugo, which one of these looks more like the real Black Whip? This was Katsuki's role in the operation. He couldn't invent anything, and he knew jack shit about support items that weren't his, so Hatsum and Melissa always asked him for his honest feedback in staying true to how One for All and all its quirks looked when wielded by Deku. Katsuki analyzed the 2 images. It was hard to tell on the computer screen, but one of them had a lot more blue in the outline, while Deku's Black Whip was more teal. The one on the left. Melissa looked at the one in her right hand. My left, he added. Melissa grinned sheepishly. All right. Are you excited about coming over for another visit? I know my dad has been waiting a while to see Uncle Might again. Oh, I'm sure, Katsuki muttered. I've wanted to see the suit for ages, Hatsum reveled. I can't wait to get my hands on it and start tinkering in person. It's definitely changed a lot since last year, Melissa nodded. We're pretty much in the final stretch. Black Whip and Gear Shift are all we have left to do, and they have been the harder quirks to implement, plus there's all the balancing of the other quirks to keep in mind. Katsuki's phone suddenly started buzzing, so he picked it up and checked his notifications. He was getting money transferred from all his classmates. Of course, he thought, it's payday for everyone. He checked his own balance and saw that his earnings had been deposited too. He would send the funds to Melissa once everyone was done sending him money. What about you, Bakugo? Melissa asked. Is hero work going well? Same old thing, he responded. And how is Deku? I feel so bad that I don't talk to him often, but I am just awful at keeping secrets. Is he liking teaching? Yeah, it's fine. That's good. I feel like we might be done in the next year or so I'm gonna keep working hard to finish it. I can't thank you enough, Bakugo. This has been the most fun I've had on a project since Uncle Might's suit 7 years ago. Don't sweat it, Katsuki said. Look, I'll go now. Is there anything else you wanted? Nope. Melissa chirped. Just letting you know progress is good, and we'll let you know if we need anything else. Alright. Later. He hung up the call and closed the app, getting up from his chair and collapsing on his bed. Along with the notifications that he was being sent money, their group chat without Deku was also filling up with messages. Kaminari. Bakugo, did you get my payment? Ishido. I keep worrying it didn't go through. Bakugo. I got them. Kaminari. Yippee. Uraraka. How is the suit coming along, Bakugo? Ida. Any updates on when it will be finished? Bakugo. Pink hair and glasses said it could be done in the next year. Kirishima. Whoa, that's so soon. Are you gonna tell Midoriya? Bakugo. Dumbass, I already said I'm not telling him anything until it's 100% done. Kaminari. Oh la, degree. Gotta be Mr. Perfectionist for Midoriya? Bakugo. I will if I end you. Todoroki. When are you and Midoriya's days off? I'd like to see you guys. Uraraka. Kirishima. Same. Yeah, we miss you too. Ida. I would like to as well. Ishido. Let's have a Class A reunion. Bakugo. Deku's day off is Sunday. I don't take days off unless it's important. Kaminari. Seeing your buddies isn't important, Kacchan? Sad face. Bakugo. Shut the F up and don't call me that. Kaminari. Ouch. Kirishima. Bakugo, let us know if you want to come hang out one day. I'll message Midoriya and tell him I want to catch up. Bakugo. Catch up with him yourself, I already see the DMing nerd every day. Ishido. Bakugo. I'm leaving now. Kirishima. We do want to see you too, man. I'm free Sunday, so think about taking a day off. Bakugo. Katsuki tossed his phone on the floor and stretched out on the bed. Nearly 6 years had passed since graduation, and his classmates were still the same. He sighed. They were annoying, but they were good people. They were doing this for Deku's sake and at his own request. It was very humbling when he went to them, basically begging for money, but they were very gracious about it, asking what else they could do to help and swearing up and down that they wouldn't let a single peep of the project be revealed to Deku. Deep down, he had to admit that he sometimes enjoyed their company. It was very easy for people to get on Katsuki's nerves and for him to get sick of them, but he had to agree that he wanted to see how they were. His last interaction with a former classmate who wasn't Deku was over a month ago when he was teamed up with Kirishima and that steel clone of him to help with a villain situation. However, other than texting, class rarely saw each other. It was just part of the job, and no one was to blame for it. Katsuki sighed and reached for his phone, opening up his chat with Deku and feeling his stomach flip at seeing the previous message, which was Deku accepting his apology. Kacchan. Want to get lunch with our loser classmates on Sunday? Absolutely. Kirishima already asked if I was available. Wait, are you going to take a day off? Kacchan. As long as you'll be fine. Kacchan. I won't go homeless missing 1 day of work, moron. I just worry about you, Kacchan .. but yes, I'll message the others and hopefully we can get a few of them to come to lunch with us. Kacchan. Let's look around after you finish tomorrow to find a new place to eat. Kacchan. Smiley face. It was so nice to have that lunch yesterday, wasn't it, Kacchan? Don't act like you weren't excited to see everyone. I wasn't. Izuku and Katsuki hopped off the train and walked into the city's bustling streets. The air was bitingly cold, and a weak fog still lingered in front of them. It seemed the temperature would drop dramatically before warming up again for summer, so the two men were bundled up to protect themselves from the cold. Izuku had his multicolored scarf on, along with a regular navy blue hoodie, and Katsuki wore his most expensive piece of clothing he had, a mustard yellow puffer jacket that his parents had gotten for him as a birthday gift. This meant the cold was attacking everywhere else, and Izuku could feel that his freckled cheeks and the tip of his nose were ice cold. He kept his hands stuck deep in his pockets and his arms close to his body, trying to absorb all the body heat he could to prevent shivering. Katsuki was only wearing his hero costume under his jacket, but since it was made to keep him warm, he probably didn't even need the extra layers. Izuku was the one who managed to convince him to wear something on top, which he reluctantly agreed to. I saw how happy you were to see Kirishima, smiled Izuku. Clouds of hot air formed around his mouth as he spoke. He's the only one I can tolerate for more than 5 minutes. Katsuki's face was half buried in his jacket, so his voice was muffled. It was nice to see so many people from our class, but it was a shame Yaoyorozu, Jiru and Kaminari had to leave so early. Heroes really have no time to spare, huh? Katsuki wasn't paying attention now. He was scrolling through his phone, looking at his many notifications. There was a message from Melissa thanking him for sending the funds for the suit. There were a few from the suit group chat, which he ignored since Izuku had a bad habit of peeking over his shoulders and reading his texts. There were a few emails from his sidekicks and employees at the agency updating him on their schedule for the new week. Katsuki glanced at Izuku subtly. He was still talking about their lunch yesterday. What do you think, Kacchan? Katsuki froze, no idea what he was asking. He scrambled to think of a blanket statement response. The food was good. Izuku nodded. Yeah, it was delicious. I'd definitely go there again. In fact, he paused and took his hand out of his pockets, patting down his body in a panic. Oh no. What? That just reminded me. I had leftovers from yesterday's outing, and I put them in the fridge to bring today for lunch, Izuku groaned. Katsuki chuckled. Forgetting your lunch? That's a first. You're always coming to work with that enormous backpack. He slapped the faded yellow bag that was on Izuku's shoulders. I thought you were bringing a FNG buffet with you every day. I don't always bring this bag, Izuku muttered. Do you mean it? It'll be bad by the time I get home. Just eat the food from the cafeteria, Katsuki said. No, I have a lot of work to get done, and I need that time. That's why I wanted to bring the leftovers in the first place, so I could heat them up in the staff room. Izuku sighed and realized they were at the spot in the road where they parted ways. It'll be alright, Kacchan. I'll just make myself a big dinner tonight. He waved goodbye to a deep-in-thought Katsuki as he walked towards you. See you this afternoon. Today, Izuku and his students were practicing with their quirks at the USJ, just as he had 8 years ago. He was there with Aizawa and Class 1A, and they were preparing to work in teams to improve their analysis of rescue missions. Usually, hero work took place in the afternoon, but Aizawa and Izuku agreed to give them at least one full day to explore the USJ and familiarize themselves with it. Being a hero is all about saving people from perilous situations, began Aizawa. This does not always involve detaining another person. A lot of the situations pros are called in to take care of are things like landslides, car crashes, or someone being stuck on a high building. They must also be able to traverse natural disasters like tornadoes and tsunamis. We train you for every situation, and we want you to be able to handle it calmly. It could be a small house fire or a collapsing building. You treat both of them with the same goal in mind, saving people. In addition, we want you to try and go beyond your limits and try things outside your comfort zone, Izuku added. For example, if you have a flame quirk, you might think you would not do as well if you were called to assist in a fire. But we want to help you grow and practice your critical thinking so you can help others without using your quirk if placed in an unfamiliar situation. Midoriya is right, said Aizawa. Don't get complacent and only focus on training in areas that mesh well with your quirk. It'll lead to some bad habits. He pulled out a notepad and flipped it open. All right, there are 40 of you, so we'll split you up into 10 teams of 4 and mix the classes. Midoriya and I will walk around and give you pointers as you need them. Of course, come and ask if you want any assistance. Izuku wandered around the USJ, speaking to and helping his students. Some were acting out a rescue scene and wanted his advice on how to speak to an injured and scared victim. Some asked him for his opinion on their weaknesses and where they could improve. He was walking through the ruined city area of the USJ, having checked on almost all of his students, when a familiar face came running up to him. Big bro sensei? Koda called out. Could you come check on us? Izuku smiled. Sure. Koda, another boy, and a girl were standing around a ruined building, looking up. When Izuku followed their gaze, he saw another girl he didn't recognize standing inside the building. Are you all right up there? Izuku shouted. Yep, she yelled back. Izuku watched as she climbed over a window ledge and stretched out her legs, continuing until her feet touched the ground. Then, with a snap, her body followed down, and she stood there with a grin. Whoa! What an interesting quirk! Izuku exclaimed. You must be in Class 1A. Yes. Aizawa-sensei told us all about you, she said. He said you're a real genius when it comes to analysis, so go on. Guess what my quirk is? Izuku put one hand on his chin and thought for a second. Then, as the cogs in his brain turned, he started muttering. Well, you clearly have the ability to stretch out your legs to a huge degree, which is a great quirk for a hero. It's sort of like MT Lady's gigantification but without the limitation of only going from one size to another. But can you only stretch your legs out, or is it other parts as well? And how far out can you stretch? That building's about 15 meters high, but it didn't seem to be too challenging for you. In that case, you could probably find out how far you can stretch by doing training similar to what Zero used to do. By that, I mean stretching out as far as you can and keep going further to strengthen your muscles and increase the total length at which you can stretch. Oh, and you could also use your stretchiness to capture villains in a sort of binding attack, like how Kamui Woods does. Additionally, it's great for rescues in a lot of ways. You can reach up to high places and rescue them like that, or you could get through debris and reach people trapped under rubble, or you could pull people out of dangerous water, or carry a lot of first aid or dash. Sensei. Izuku snapped out of his state and turned to his befuddled students. They all looked confused, except for Koda, who was giggling to himself. Sorry. Izuku squeaked. I tend to get caught up in myself. I'm so sorry about that. The girl's face went from confusion to amazement. I only wanted you to try and guess what my quirk was, B, but you figured me out so fast. A huge grin spread across her face, and she held her hand up, pinching one finger. So, it's called rubber band. You basically got it all right. I can stretch my body really far and then snap all the way back. She showed it off by pulling back her pointer finger and then releasing it, letting it return to its original size. Currently, my limit is about 25 meters. And the further I go, the bigger the snap, so to speak, which causes me a bit of disorientation for a few seconds. Oh, and my name's Waharucho, hero name, snapback. Harucho finished her introduction with a wide grin and proud hands on her hips. Koda, who had been standing next to her, turned to his teacher. Hey, Midoriya-sensei, how come we haven't chosen hero names yet? You usually pick them after the sports festival, Izuku explained. Of course, that doesn't stop you from coming up with one before that. You could pick one now if you wanted, Koda. Koda's face turned red. Yeah, and maybe I will. Anyway, I wanted to ask you for your help with an idea I had. Yes. What was it? Well, last week, you told me that I could try working on the water pressure, so my attacks could be a lot more powerful. But I had an idea where, well, Koda put his hand out and expelled water from his palms. It was a very small stream of water. I was thinking about it with Harucho, and she said that if she grabbed civilians from a high building and passed them onto my water stream, I could slowly bring them down to the ground. But I don't really know how to control the pressure. Harucho put a hand on her classmate's shoulder. You just need a person to practice on, Izumi. Which is why we have Midoriya-sensei here as the test subject. Koda's eyes widened. But he'll get drenched. I can't do that. I have a classmate in 1A who has a wind quirk, suggested Harucho. When we're done, she can dry him off. Izuku smiled at his students. It's actually not a bad idea, Harucho. He pulled off his shoes and black blazer and undid his tie, leaving only his white button-up shirt and pants on. I'll be the helpless civilian up in the wreckage of the building, and you can get me down. Are you sure? What if I mess up? What if you fall? I'll catch him, Harucho said triumphantly. Don't stress too much, Izumi. For the next half an hour, Izuku helped Koda control the water pressure coming from his hands and was brought down on a water sprout, leaving his body completely soaked in water. It was a small price to pay because nothing could beat the joy on Koda's face when he managed to get Izuku down from the highest floor and onto the ground with no issues. As he high-fived his students, Aizawa came over with his notepad in hand. Midoriya, we're going to get ready to leave in 10 minutes. He stared down Izuku, who was damp from head to toe. I'm assuming you have a spare change of clothes with you? Soyakana can dry him off, piped up Harucho. Izuku smiled at Aizawa, who shook his head. All right. He walked away as Harucho called over her classmate, and Izuku was dried off. His hair and shirt were still a little damp and messy, but he felt somewhat refreshed. Big bro Midoriya, whispered Koda as Izuku pulled on his blazer. Thanks for helping me. Sorry you got all wet. The young boy didn't like calling his teacher anything other than sensei. In front of his classmates he was still a teenage boy, afraid of what others thought. Izuku smiled and put a hand on his head. Anytime, Koda. It's my job to help you out. Class 1A and 1B headed back to the UA campus just in time for lunch. Izuku was relieved. He had a lot of work to catch up on, and he was honestly just a little tired out from all the training he'd done with his students. Plus, knowing he didn't have lunch to eat made him feel a little sad. So when the bus stopped outside of the UA gate and the classes got off, the last thing they expected to hear was a loud voice calling for Izuku just outside the gate. "Oi, sensei!" Izuku and his students whipped their heads towards the gate and saw the pro-hero Dynamite standing there. A couple of girls squealed. "Is that Dynamite? Holy crap! Great explosion murder god Dynamite? I've seen him on TV. He's so cool. Where? I don't see him. He's so hot. You have weird taste. Do you think he'll let me get an autograph? No way, man. He's a total JRK to people. Nah. My sister met him once, and he was nice to her. He even took a selfie. You're full of dash. Hey, don't push." Izuku stared at Katsuki, who was grinning. He quickly diverted his attention back to his class, which he held back with his arms outstretched. "Everyone inside, please." This was met with a collective groan. It's better to be inside the barrier. I'll go talk to Kisi, Dynamite. Can you ask him to visit our class, sensei? Asked one kid. Many others chimed in agreement. I've got to find out what he's here for first, Izuku said. Inside now. His students reluctantly walked inside, craning their necks to try and get a glimpse of the pro. Once the last student was inside, Izuku rushed over to Katsuki, who was still smirking at him. He had one hand on his hip and a small plastic bag in the other. "Kacchan!" Izuku blurted out. What are you dash? I'll have you know, sensei, that it's actually Dynamite when I'm on duty," he grinned. Izuku rolled his eyes. "What are you doing here?" Katsuki lifted the plastic bag. "Lunch." He moved it into Izuku's hands. Izuku spluttered. "Lunch?" He unwrapped the bag, and there was a takeaway box from the place he and his classmates had gotten food the day before. He looked up at Katsuki, then looked back down at the box. He opened it, and it was fresh katsudon. He nearly dropped the bag in shock. "Kacchan, you didn't have to dash," Izuku stammered. "Like you said, the leftovers in your fridge will be off when you get home. Might as well get you a replacement," Katsuki said. "Beep, ooh, it's still warm. I flew from that place right here." "You remembered what I ate yesterday?" Katsuki scoffed. "Course I did. Wasn't hard. You get the same thing every time we go out." He paused. "To eat?" "Kacchan," he sighed and lifted his head to meet his friend's eyes. "You really didn't have to buy me lunch. How much was it? I'll pay you back dash." "For F's sake, Deku," he sighed heavily. "You don't have to pay me back. It's fine. Just go to your office and eat it." "Don't swear on campus, Kacchan," Izuku said. "I swore on campus all the time and turned out fine. I just don't want my students to hear. They're watching you right now." "What?" Izuku turned to where Katsuki pointed and saw multiple heads peeking over a window. When he made eye contact, the heads all dropped below the ledge, and Katsuki snickered. "Good kids." He picked up his gauntlets, which were down by his feet. "Gotta bounce. I'll see dash." He stopped and stared at Izuku for a few seconds. "Where's your tie?" "My tie?" Izuku repeated. "Oh yeah." He undid his blazer and fished into his chest pocket, pulling out the red fabric. Katsuki felt heat rush to his cheeks. With the blazer unbuttoned, he could see Izuku's damp white shirt clinging to his lightly tanned skin, leaving little to the imagination. He averted his eyes. "You're drenched," he stated, putting down his gauntlets. "Not really. I was helping Koda with his quirk, so I got a little wet. I had to take off my blazer and tie. I'm mostly dry now. Let me do it again." Katsuki snatched the tie from Izuku's hand and looped it around his neck. He pushed the blazer off his shoulders, so it now clung to Izuku's elbows. "Wait, Kacchan? Weren't you about to leave?" Katsuki ignored him and kept his eyes on Izuku's collarbone as he redid the knot he'd done so many times before. He finished it off with a tighten and then turned around to leave again. "See you later." Izuku didn't even get a chance to say anything before Katsuki blasted off into the air again, leaving him stunned. He blinked and stared at the food in his hand. Shaking his head, he fixed up his blazer and held the plastic bag tight as he darted back into the school. "Midoriya-sensei, I didn't know you were friends with Great Explosion Murder God Dynamite." When Izuku returned to his class, all eyes were on him, eager for an explanation of his relationship with the pro hero. He sighed. Look, we have to get through this before the next class, so dash. I know that they were friends in school, announced Koda. They were in the hero course together. Murmurs of interest rippled across the classroom. Is that true, sensei? Yes, Kacchan and I were in the hero course together. But we've actually known each other dash. Kacchan? Cried the class in unison. I mean, Dynamite. We're childhood friends dash. Why do you call him Kacchan? Isn't that a little girly? How long have you known each other? What's his real name, sensei? Does he call you Midori-chan? Why was he doing your tie? How does his quirk work? I've always wanted to ask him. Izuku groaned. He didn't want to engage with his class about this topic, but they had backed him into a corner. He suddenly threw his hands down on his podium, creating a loud sound that shut all his students up. You guys know I'm not strict. But we're wasting time right now, and you're asking me very personal questions about me and very personal questions about a pro hero, which is very invasive. Maybe we need to do a revision on hero etiquette before we get to the main lesson. The class was silent. Izuku was a very patient teacher, but when he got serious, they knew when to stop messing around. So they all kept their mouths shut. Izuku smiled. Thank you. Listen, I've talked to Dynamite about maybe coming in for a lesson one day. If you behave, I can bring it up to him again. Deal? Yes, sensei. The final bell rang, and Izuku was exhausted. After his lesson, the hero course went back to the USJ to finish out the day with more quirk training. He had consulted with 40 students and was running on empty. He made a mental note to profusely thank Katsuki for the lunch because he may have passed out from exhaustion if he hadn't eaten. Izuku walked down the path towards the coffee shop, scrolling through his phone as he did. He continuously checked the news about the recent hero situations to keep up with what his friends were doing. He saw flashes of Uraraka, Ida, and Todoroki in the headlines. There was even a new one on Katsuki that he hadn't read yet. Excitedly, he clicked on it, but as he was engrossed in his phone, he bumped into someone on the pathway who fell backwards. Izuku immediately shoved his phone in his pocket. I am so sorry. Are you okay? The person who fell was a short, middle-aged man with thin, grayish-brown hair. He looked tired as he opened his eyes and saw Izuku reaching out his hand. Oh, young man, do my eyes deceive me? He said breathlessly. Are you the young hero from 8 years ago? Goodness me, your hero name escapes me now. Izuku pulled the man to his feet. Sir, I do deeply apologize. I wasn't looking where I was going, it was entirely my fault. Are you hurt at all? The man laughed. Oh no, son. Takes more than a fall for these old bones to break. But really, the hero name. It's on the tip of my tongue. Oh yeah. My name's Izuku Midoriya, but my hero name was Deku. The man snapped his fingers. That's what it was. I knew I recognized you from somewhere. I'm just glad to hear I didn't injure you, sir. Oh, it's quite all right, Deku. Say, you really haven't aged a day, have you? Huh, you think so? Oh yes. Not like some of the other heroes from back in the day. But they were under so much stress they looked like me while in their 20s. Well, I'm not actually a hero anymore. Izuku smiled, then bowed at the man. I'm very sorry, but I must be off now. I apologize again. The older man gave Izuku a short wave as he turned and started walking to the coffee shop. So, Midoriya, did you like the lunch the boss brought you? The secretary greeted Izuku as soon as he walked through the glass doors of Katsuki's hero agency. Oh, you knew about that? Well, he certainly doesn't bring lunch to just anyone. So when he said he would be heading out to UA with a bag full of takeaway, putting the pieces together didn't take much thinking. Yeah, I just forgot my lunch today. It was a really nice thing of him to do. Hell yeah, it was. The door to the staff room swung open, and Katsuki was there with his puffy jacket in hand. Don't expect me to do it again if you're too dumb to remember your own lunch. I'm not your mom. I won't forget again, Kacchan. Tihich. Katsuki turned to face the lobby, where a few of his employees were. All right, losers, I'm outta here. You got solitaire at the front desk to take orders from. The employees all nodded back and waved as Katsuki and Izuku left the building. Who's solitaire? Izuku asked. Secretary. I caught her playing it on her computer once, and I never let her live it down. He took the coffee cup from Izuku's hand and took a long sip. Wait, you were cool with it? I'm not some kind of evil shithead who would fire someone over a card game, Deku. Yeah, she shouldn't have done it, but it was like 11 p.m. and we were empty. No big deal. Plus, she's dim and good at doing paperwork which bores the F out of me. I'm not giving her up to go help the other morons. I see. Katsuki coughed. So. Izuku looked at him. Yeah. He ran his hand through his blonde hair. Tell me about your students. Izuku's face brightened, and he smiled from ear to ear. You want to hear about my students? Yes, Katsuki forced out through gritted teeth. I know you're forcing yourself, but I'm so happy you asked. I ain't forcing. But Katsuki knew Izuku didn't hear him as he began talking about his students, their quirks, and their training. He rambled all the way from Katsuki's agency to the train station and continued all the way into the journey. He was so happy he didn't even realize how tired he was until halfway into a sentence. He fell asleep on Katsuki's shoulder, the sound of the train soothing him into a slumber. Deku. Hey, Deku. Deku stirred slowly as Katsuki tapped him on the shoulder. His half-lidded green eyes searched his surroundings before landing on Katsuki's crimson ones. Kacchan. We're home. Up you get, nerd. Deku stretched and got to his feet, nearly tripping. He gripped the pole next to the chair and steadied himself. Did I fall asleep? He yawned. Katsuki rolled his eyes. What does it feel like to you? He got to his feet and headed towards the door with a sluggish Deku following behind him. He kept yawning as they walked, and his eyes were red from him rubbing them. I don't even remember passing out, he murmured. Sorry for falling asleep on you. Whatever, Katsuki said. I can't believe you yapped so much you dozed off. Oh yeah, you asked about my students? Deku turned to face Katsuki and smiled, his face still filled with exhaustion. That was nice of you. Thank you, Kacchan. Katsuki blushed. Deku looked like he might fall right into his arms, given his tired state. His face was tinted pink, and his eyes still weren't all the way open. His voice was a lot softer too, and it made Katsuki's chest fill with a strange feeling. He averted his eyes. Yeah, whatever, was what he settled on as a reply. And Deku paused to yawn. I really do need to thank you for bringing me lunch. I was so tired after these I don't think I would have made it through the afternoon on an empty stomach. It's fine, Deku. You're such a thoughtful friend, Kacchan. I know you try to hide it, but really, you do care, don't you? Katsuki paused and allowed himself to breathe before thinking of something to say. He was really not liking how Deku was making him feel. His stomach felt like it was in the Olympics for gymnastics because of how much it was flipping around. It was an emotion he didn't have a word for. Nervousness was the closest thing he could come up with, but that just set him off more. Why would being around Deku make him nervous? He'd known the DMN nerd for over 20 years now. They basically knew each other inside and out. There were times when he didn't know what Deku was feeling, and that set him off. It didn't make him nervous. Nothing made him nervous. He wanted to reply to Deku with a sarcastic comment, but the silence between them was too long now. Katsuki was so engrossed in thought that he'd walked to his apartment on autopilot. He didn't even realize he was there until he started reaching for his keys, which were in his jacket pocket. Then he turned around and saw Deku still behind him, struggling to keep his eyes open. What did you follow me home for, stalker? Deku's eyes nearly burst out of his skull. He stood up straight and whipped his head back and forth as if trying to come up with a reasonable explanation as to why he was on Katsuki's heels. Oh crap. Sorry, Kacchan, He was interrupted by another long yawn, which forced him to put one hand on the brick wall to steady himself. When he finished, he looked at Katsuki with the same fatigued eyes he'd had all evening. I'm so sorry, Kacchan. I wasn't even thinking, I was just putting one foot in front of the other, and I followed you. Truth is, I'm completely exhausted. I'm so tired from today that I could fall asleep on your doorstep. Katsuki kept staring at his childhood friend in silence. The shitty nerd couldn't even stand up properly. If he tried walking the 1-minute trip across the road to his own apartment, he might end up as roadkill. Katsuki put both hands on his hips and sighed. "I'm not carrying you home, Deku." His green eyes closed, and he nodded his head. I know. Sorry, Kacchan. I can walk myself home, don't worry." Deku turned to go back down the stairs, wobbling as he held the handrail tightly. "That's not what I meant." Deku turned around at the sound of Katsuki unlocking his door and opening it. Katsuki stood out of the way and held the door open for Deku to come inside. "I'm not carrying you home, so just crash at my place tonight." Deku's eyes widened, and it looked like his knees were about to buckle. "What? Are you sure? It's not like this is the first time, right?" Deku merely shook his head. "But it has been a while, Kacchan, so I dash. Do you need anything from your house?" Katsuki cut him off. Deku shook his head again. "Then get inside. The cold's gonna get in." Deku nervously looked Katsuki up and down before shuffling into the inviting apartment. Katsuki locked the door behind the two and removed his shoes, prompting Deku to do the same. He then turned to look at him, narrowing his blood-red eyes. "Do you feel sick? Fever or anything?" Deku shook his head again. Not sick. Just sleepy." He inhaled sharply, showing his nose was not blocked. Just to be sure, Katsuki put the back of his hand on Deku's forehead, but his temperature wasn't unusual. He sighed. "Wait here." Katsuki went into his room and pulled out a pair of his pajamas. He had about 5 pairs of the exact same pants and tops, so it wouldn't matter which one he gave to his guest. He walked back out and saw Deku nearly asleep again against the wall. He rolled his eyes and shoved the clothes into Deku's chest. "Don't sleep yet. Get changed and give me your work clothes," he instructed. Deku must have been on the absolute verge of passing out because he put up no fight, walked like a zombie into Katsuki's room, and shut the door. Katsuki waited until he re-emerged with his clothes squished up in a ball. The clothes he'd been given were probably just a little too big for him, as the tank top showed a lot of the top of his chest, and the pants were so long they covered his feet. And looking at it a little closely, it looked like Deku put the shirt on backwards. "Idiot. Want need to dash." Deku yawned again, and Katsuki suppressed his own urge to yawn. "To wash him, Kacchan." "Deku, are you gross? Didn't you say you trained with that water twerp today? Your clothes have been drenched." Don't say that." "'Bout Koda." Deku stumbled over his words. Katsuki rolled his eyes and yanked the clothes out of Deku's arms. "In my bed. Now." Deku frowned. "But I always sleep on your couch." "Not this time. I've got shit to do out here, and I'm not going to tiptoe around the living room so I don't wake your butt up. Turn around, go into my room, lie on my bed and sleep." Deku lowered his head in defeat. He slowly walked into Katsuki's room, and just before he shut the door, he turned his head and smiled weakly. "Are gonna do my tie tomorrow, Kacchan?" Katsuki shook his head. Of course he was thinking about that. "Course I will, you DMN nerd. Not like you can do it yourself." It took Deku about 30 seconds to completely crash out. Katsuki stared at the sight of him sleeping for way too long, but it was sort of hypnotic. The way his chest rose and fell with each breath, the peaceful look on his face, the way his hair occasionally succumbed to gravity and fell onto his forehead. Katsuki could see every detail, every scar on his arm, every blemish on his skin. Eventually, he managed to snap out of the weird staring and close the door. He dropped Deku's clothes into a small plastic bag and left it by the front door. He didn't have a washing machine or a dryer in his home, so he did all his laundry at the laundromat, which was right around the corner. He'd take Deku's clothes there after dinner. Dinner, which, of course, was instant ramen again. He was so hungry he even had 2 cups. Then he thought about the next morning before work. Did Deku eat breakfast? Katsuki didn't, so he never bothered making anything. But he should make something for him, right? What if he didn't eat breakfast? Then Katsuki would have wasted his money. No. Even if Deku never ate breakfast at his own house, he was far too much of a wimp to turn down food someone had made for him. So, should he even bother? After debating with himself, he ultimately decided to make breakfast for Deku. It would be seen as the nice thing to do, but if Deku was so tired after only missing one meal, he should definitely be eating more. It was for the DMN nerd's own good. He made a quick list of groceries he could get while waiting for the laundry. Katsuki pulled off his shirt and threw it in the plastic bag with Deku's clothes. If he was going to the laundromat, he might as well wash his costume. He was undoing his belt when he realized he'd have to go into his room to get a jumper or something to put on. Fing hell. Deku was pretty DMN tired, so he wouldn't wake up to just the sound of Katsuki ruffling around in his room, would he? He sighed and cautiously opened his door, holding his breath. Deku hadn't moved from where he slept, which was a good sign. He crept over to his wardrobe. Luckily, he'd left it open when he'd grabbed pajamas for Deku. Katsuki pulled down one black jumper from where all his jackets were hanging up and peeked over at Deku still sleeping. He slowly continued, opening up his drawers to get a pair of cargo pants. As he turned to leave, he saw Deku sitting up on his elbows out of the corner of his eye and dropped the clothing in his arms. "Sheet," he whispered. He rushed over to Deku and put his hands on his shoulders. He could push down with little to no effort, and when his eyes darted onto Deku's face, he could see that his green eyes were barely open. Katsuki pushed Deku back down onto the mattress, trying to get him back to sleep. He really didn't want him to wake up. If he struggled just to walk properly before, he desperately needed a proper long rest. Katsuki barely caught the breathy noise Deku made, particularly because it came from his left side. Deku's eyes were slightly more open, and he could see his blown-out pupils. His eyes darted from Katsuki's face and traveled down, and he could see the wheels turning in his mind when he realized Katsuki was shirtless. Katsuki also realized what it must look like from an outsider's perspective, so he quickly shoved Deku's body back down so he was lying flat and leaned into his ear. "Sleep, Deku," he hissed. Deku barely nodded, his curls tickling Katsuki's face as he pulled away. He grabbed the clothes he had dropped and dashed out of the room, shutting the door as quietly as possible. Katsuki's mind replayed what had just happened as he changed into his newly retrieved clothes. How he'd leant over Deku's half-asleep body and shoved him back down onto the mattress. How wide Deku's eyes had gotten when he realized he was shirtless. His face heated up with shame. It shouldn't have even mattered, right? They'd changed in front of each other. They'd been in locker rooms together. It wasn't anything Deku hadn't seen before. But it felt so much more NTMT than it should have, even though it wasn't, and all Katsuki was trying to do was get the DMN nerd back to sleep. God, would Deku try to ask him about it in the morning? He might not remember it due to being so exhausted. Could Katsuki get away with feigning ignorance? For F's sake, why was he worried? He hadn't even done anything wrong. Set off, he stomped over towards the front door with the plastic bag in hand, grabbed his keys, and left his apartment, heading for the laundromat. 3 hours later, Katsuki returned with a bag full of clean clothes and another bag filled with groceries. He dropped them both in the living room, took his hearing aid out and kicked off his shoes. He was starting to get pretty DMN tired himself. Katsuki took the clean clothes out and folded up Deku's, making a small pile. He picked them up and very carefully opened his door, keeping his eyes locked on the bed. Deku didn't stir. Slowly, he crept over to his chair and placed his work clothes on it, then darted out. Deku didn't move. Silently, he breathed a sigh of relief as he shut the door again. He then collected his hero costume and placed it over one of the dining table seats. Then, he took the shopping bag and put the small amount of groceries he'd bought into the pantry. Katsuki was starting to yawn, so he closed the pantry door, double-checked all his locks, shut off the light and crawled onto the couch. As he drifted off, he realized he had forgotten to get himself a blanket. There was a spare one in his room, but he was too tired to get up. He was sure he'd wake up shivering in the morning, but he just couldn't bring himself to care. Katsuki woke to the abrupt sound of his alarm. He liked it loud, 1 because he had slept through an alarm multiple times due to his left ear, and 2 because it ensured he was 100% awake and wouldn't drift back off to sleep. But his immediate thought when he jolted back into consciousness was Deku, who needed the rest. He practically broke the screen pressing the snooze button, and tiptoed over to his room to place his good ear against the door and listen for any signs of life. After a minute, he could leave the door and head for the shower. He'd specifically chosen to wake up a little earlier so he could make Deku breakfast. As he closed the curtain and let the boiling shower water hit his skin, Katsuki let his mind wander as he fully woke up. This was the first time in a while that Deku had stayed over. Like he'd mentioned to him, he wasn't a stranger to it, but it wasn't something that happened often. Katsuki treasured his personal time, and other people very easily got on his nerves. Living alone was one of the best things that had ever happened to him. But if there was someone he didn't mind having over, it was Deku. He always took care of his own stuff and helped out with dishes and cleaning. He knew Katsuki well enough to be able to tell when he needed some space, and he was willing to give it to him. However, unlike all his other friends, Deku knew when Katsuki's alone time was up and he needed someone else to be around. It was something he would never in a million years admit to his face, but Deku sometimes knew Katsuki better than he knew himself. And that was one of the things that set him off. Deku could read him well, but Katsuki couldn't read Deku at all. After all, the reason their relationship had deteriorated so much was because he didn't understand any of Deku's intentions. He thought the young boy was always looking down on him, pitying him, thinking he was superior when he was the one who had no power of his own. It had taken Katsuki many, many years to unlearn his toxic way of thinking when it came to Deku, and he still had slip-ups. Sometimes, a sympathetic look would register as him thinking Katsuki was weak, and the insecure part of his mind would react more quickly than the rational part could. His hand curled up into a fist at the thought. He had changed. He knew better now. Deku cared about him, and there were not a lot of things in the world that would change that. Katsuki had bullied and shoved him away so many times, and he kept coming back. That said something about his persistence. Or maybe he was just an idiot. Shutting off the shower, Katsuki climbed out and dried himself off. He pulled on the clothes he had worn to bed. He didn't want to get anything on his hero costume while he cooked, so he'd just wear them again temporarily. He walked back out into the living room and picked up his hearing aid, affixing it to his left ear. Katsuki listened again for nothing. It meant he could get started on the cooking without any distractions. He had about an hour if he wanted to finish cooking in time to wake up Deku, have him eat, and still make the train. 45 minutes after Katsuki had started cooking, Deku emerged from Katsuki's room, rubbing his eyes. He was still in the pajamas he'd been given. "About time, nerd," Katsuki called out from behind the kitchen top counter. He was just about finished with breakfast and was prepping their plates. "Morning, Kacchan," Deku yawned. "What are you making?" "Food," he responded plainly. "Since you nearly passed out from lack of it yesterday, don't you dare say you're not hungry now." "Wait," Deku walked over to the counter and tried to peer over. "What did you make?" "Oi." Katsuki hid what he was doing with an empty plate. "It's not done yet. Go take a shower, you be seated, then it'll be ready." "Oh my god, is that fish?" Deku stood on his toes, curious for a glimpse of breakfast. "Get out!" Katsuki shouted. Deku jumped and ran towards the bathroom. Katsuki sighed and continued prepping the dishes. He grabbed 2 bowls, placed a few scoops of rice in them, laid the egg on top, and then added the fish. He poured the miso soup into 2 cups, then laid out 2 pairs of chopsticks. Satisfied, he smirked at his creation. Katsuki was a DMN good cook. He began cleaning up the dirty dishes he had made. He didn't want to eat before Deku because he wanted to see the priceless look on that nerd's face when he saw the phenomenal breakfast he'd made. Katsuki was putting the last bowl in the sink when he heard footsteps from the hall. He turned around, expecting to see Deku in his work blazer, but his jaw nearly broke when he saw that Deku was standing there with a towel wrapped around his waist, hair dripping wet. Sorry, Kacchan," he stammered, clearly embarrassed. Where did you put my clothes?" Katsuki stared at the floor tiles as he pinched the bridge of his nose. "They're in my room, you idiot. I folded them up on the chair for you." "Oh, you did? I'm so sorry, I didn't see them." Katsuki kept his eyes on the ground until he heard the sound of a door closing, then lifted his head. Was he dreaming? Was this some weird FNG fever dream, where he'd let Deku stay over and was cursed to have every awkward interaction known to man with him? He tried to remain calm. It was fine. It was fine to see Deku in just a towel, his chest and stomach shiny from the water. It was fine to know he was in Katsuki's room, changing. It was fine knowing he'd let him stay over while on the brink of passing out from exhaustion, even though he only lived a minute away. It was fine. Deku finally emerged from getting changed and shyly stood at the kitchen counter. "So, is it ready yet?" Katsuki slid the bowls down towards Deku, whose face brightened. "Oh whoa. This looks great, Kacchan." "Of course it does, moron. I'm the one who made it." He took his own bowl and started eating. Deku was clearly enjoying the meal. He'd practically overflown his chopsticks with every bite. "How long did this take you to make?" Deku asked. "Like 45 minutes, replied Katsuki. "Oh, you must have gotten up so early, Kacchan. I hope you got enough rest." "I'm not the one who nearly passed out in the stairwell, Deku." Deku blushed. "Yeah, I really don't know what came over me. It was like all the sleep I'd gotten in the last week was taken, and I was so sleep-deprived I could barely speak. To be honest, I still feel a little bit tired, more than I usually am in the mornings. But I'm better than last night." Deku looked down at his bowl as his chopsticks hit the plastic. "Oh, I'm done. That was great. Thanks so much for making this, Kacchan." "You're seriously spoiled, Deku," Katsuki scoffed. "I bring you lunch and then make you breakfast?" "Princess." Deku huffed, joining Katsuki behind the counter as he rinsed his bowl out. "I'd forgotten how well you can cook when you actually have ingredients. This is probably the most food I've ever seen in your apartment, Kacchan." It was like Deku had just stomped on his heart. A mean scowl appeared on his face as soon as Katsuki processed what he said. When Deku didn't get a response to what he had said, he turned to look at Katsuki, only to immediately look scared at the expression on his face. Kacchan, I'm sorry. That was really rude." Katsuki said nothing as he dropped his bowl in the sink and grabbed his hero costume from the dining table. He ignored Deku's calls for his name and locked himself in his room. What the f had Deku just said? That he knew how cheap Katsuki lived? That he looked down on him, thought he was some kind of lowlife who didn't have enough money to take care of himself? As if he wasn't a responsible adult who managed a full-time job, an agency, and a house on his own. The cruel, disgusting part of his brain wanted to burst out there and rub it in his face. Explain the reason he lived so frugally was because he was putting all he could into getting Deku back into hero work. Oh, he knew that BSRD would be groveling at his feet, begging for forgiveness in a heartbeat. He gritted his teeth and tried to breathe, to calm down. He told himself to think logically, to think about it from his point of view. To recall all the cheesy advice he'd been given by doctors and psychiatrists who tried to get him to manage his anger. None of them lasted very long, but some of their words did leave an impact on how he dealt with things. Once his heart rate had slowed down, his mind started to clear, and he allowed his reasonable thoughts to come forward. Deku doesn't know why you live like this, he thought to himself. On the outside looking in, it probably seems a little fing strange that you earn so much as a pro but live in such a bland shithole. That okay, his house wasn't a shithole, but compared to some of the other pro houses they'd visited, Katsuki wouldn't be winning any awards for interior decorating. He took a big gulp of air and sighed. He didn't know. It's not his fault. He didn't mean any harm. It's not your fault either. You could have told him about the suit from the start. No one forced you to keep it a secret. But you wanted it to be a big fing surprise, so shit like this happens. It's no one's fault. He doesn't think you're weak, he doesn't think you're a loser. Calm down. Katsuki changed into his hero costume and gathered everything he needed. He even decided to wear the stupid puffy jacket his mom and dad had gotten for him. It's designer, Katsuki, he mimicked under his breath. He opened the door to see Deku, who was cleaning up the rest of breakfast. Kacchan, he gasped. He ran over and lowered his head. I'm so sorry. That was incredibly rude of me. I shouldn't have said that about your home. I'm really sorry, Kacchan. I didn't mean it, it was just a stupid, bad joke. Katsuki didn't say anything. He just checked his phone and looked at the door. We should go. We might miss the train. Deku looked like he wanted to say something else, but Katsuki was reaching for his keys. Deku fiddled with his hands, trying to build up the courage to say something. As Katsuki was about to put his hand on the doorknob, Deku spoke. Kacchan? He spun around. What, Deku? God, he hated the way Deku spoke when he was scared. It made him feel sick to his stomach. Deku flinched. He reached into his pocket, looking anywhere but Katsuki's eyes. A flash of red emerged. Just, Mai Tai? Part of Katsuki wanted to walk outside and slam the door in his face. Part of him wanted to cup his face in his hands and hold him until he felt better. Part of him wanted to scream at him to learn to do his own DMN Tai. Part of him wanted to drag Deku back to his bed and lie there with him all day, stroking his soft green hair until he fell asleep as if they had no responsibilities. All these conflicting feelings were bubbling inside him like a volcano threatening to erupt, and at the height of his anger, Katsuki took a deep breath, looked Deku right in the eye and held out his hand. Sure. I got it. Katsuki and Izuku were silent on their walk to the train station. Izuku realized as soon as he stepped into the freezing cold that he'd forgotten to put on his hoodie, so he pushed his hands into his pockets, covered his nose with his scarf and kept any complaining to himself. He'd managed to make Katsuki angry already, and he felt awful. After they'd left his apartment, he hadn't spoken another word, but Izuku's stomach filled up with guilt. Reading his emotions was impossible. He was scowling at him in 1 minute, being softly spoken in the next, and now he wasn't making a peep. Izuku had gotten so used to being able to joke around with his friend that he hadn't stopped to think about what he was implying. He didn't care how Katsuki chose to live. As long as he was happy and healthy, that was all he should be worried about. And Katsuki had been thoughtful enough to make him a delicious breakfast. Izuku slapped himself mentally. What a stupid thing to say after such a kind action was done for him. The train ride was also silent. Izuku still sat next to Katsuki, but he made a conscious effort not to touch him. He'd already fallen asleep on him the day before. Izuku was sure that was one of the reasons Katsuki was mad. He wasn't a big fan of physical touch. So he kept his hands firmly on his knees and tried his best to remain still. Even as the swaying of the train was luring him into sleep, he fought to stay awake. As they reached their stop, Izuku still expected to be met with silence. But when they stepped off the platform and onto the streets, Katsuki turned to him. Izuku. Goosebumps shot up Izuku's entire body. He felt electrified, as if 1,000 currents were running up and down his skin. His fingertips were tingly, and he felt his entire body getting warmer. He slowly turned and met Katsuki's soft gaze. Yeah. I'm sorry. He tilted his head down slightly, then met Izuku's wide eyes again. I acted like a a-hole. I'm sorry for being a prissy brat. You didn't do anything wrong. A small smile appeared on Izuku's lips. Katsuki was acting like the good-hearted person Izuku knew he could be. He felt the terrible feeling in his stomach drain out and shook his head. Thank you, Kacchan, he started. But I am also sorry for making fun of you. It was wrong. I make fun of you all the time, Deku, Katsuki responded, reverting back to the nickname. It's only fair. Yes, but how you live isn't my business. It's not my place to make jokes. I don't know your reasons for why you live, but it's not my business. As long as you're safe, that's all I care about. Katsuki's mouth was closed, and his lips formed a very thin line. He didn't reply, simply nodding and continuing to walk. Also, and I'm not trying to excuse myself, but Kacchan, I am so tired, Izuku admitted. I know I got a lot of sleep last night, and I should expect to be a little tired in the morning, but I already feel so exhausted. I don't know what's wrong with me. Katsuki frowned. Maybe you are sick. I don't feel sick, Izuku said. I feel perfectly healthy, except for the fact that all I want to do is sleep for the rest of my life. He paused. Maybe I should see a doctor? That was news to Katsuki's ears. Izuku was always putting his self-preservation to the side and wouldn't have noticed if his own DMN hands were cut off if he was too focused on helping someone. But I don't want to take a day off. It's so early in the semester, and there's so much work to get through. My students are working so hard, I don't want to disappoint them. Ah, that sounded more like Izuku. Okay, if I'm not better by tomorrow morning, I'll go to the doctor. He turned to Katsuki. What do you think? As long as you don't drop dead in the middle of your class, he shrugged. Kacchan. Oh, by the way, they'd reached their parting point, so Katsuki turned to leave. You were so tired last night that you put your clothes on backwards. It was quite amusing. What? Izuku cried. Kacchan, that's so embarrassing. Why didn't you tell me? Katsuki was already walking away with a grin on his face. Later, nerd. That day, Izuku only had to stand in for homeroom before he had the whole day to himself until hero training in the afternoon. He was almost finished writing up a new plan for his students as they shifted to preparing for the sports festival. Izuku was walking down the halls towards the staff room when he ran into Kota, who was in his gym uniform. Big bro Midoriya, he exclaimed. Good morning, Kota, Izuku smiled. What are you doing here so early? Well, I wanted to do some training in the gym, specifically with the water pressure move you've been teaching me. You know, the one where I focus on one part of my hand, and it's super strong. Izuku had taught Kota this technique, a move that was very similar to Katsuki's AP shot. He nodded. Well, I'm getting better at it, but Auntie said I couldn't practice at home in case I accidentally wreck something, Kota pouted. So I was going to try in the gym with Cementos. I want to try and actually pierce rock this time. Izuku put his hand on his young student's head and beamed. You're improving so fast. I'm very proud of you. Make sure to keep working on it. I will. Thank you. Will you check it out this afternoon when we do training? Of course. Thanks. I can't wait for the sports festival. I mean, you told me people always recognized you after it. I want to get recognized like that. Kota gushed. Actually, this morning, while I was walking here, a man asked if I was one of your students. Isn't that cool, Midoriya? You're still super famous. Izuku suddenly felt a flash of a bad feeling in his stomach, but he didn't let it show on his face. Yeah, I do get recognized sometimes. It's nice to know people still remember me. Just make sure to stay safe around strangers, Kota. Most of them mean well, but you can't always tell who doesn't. Kota rolled his eyes and smirked. Yeah, I'm smart. I'm not a kid anymore. I'll see you soon. He ran down the hallway, and Izuku merely shook his head, too tired to enforce any rules. In the afternoon, Izuku could barely blink without having the urge to sleep. Every time his eyelids closed, he didn't want to open them again. It was such a strange feeling. Nothing in his mind said he was tired or bored. He enjoyed helping his students and had incredible conversations with them about their training and quirks. But his body was fighting against him, begging him to get into a bed and rest. He sat on the ground watching his students run back and forth on the tracks. Some of the students asked if he was okay, but he really couldn't give any other answer other than saying he was just tired. Even Aizawa was notified and confronted him, concerned. Midoriya, you look awful. When was the last time you slept? Izuku sighed. Last night, and that's the thing. I slept really well. It wasn't a lie. He remembered passing out on Katsuki's bed and not much else until he woke up the next day. A few images flashed in his mind, like burned photographs in a strong wind. But none of them were solid enough for him to form any memory. It was likely they were all dreams. Are you sure? Aizawa wasn't convinced. He couldn't blame him. He felt so exhausted, so it probably looked like he was lying. I talked about it with Kacchan this morning, Izuku said. He did suggest I go to a doctor. So he does have rational thoughts sometimes. Aizawa brushed his dark hair out of his face and folded his arms. Well, I can't say I disagree. Why don't you leave early today and see if you can get a doctor's appointment this afternoon? If not, tomorrow morning. We can get someone to cover you and I'll watch your class for the last hour. Are you sure? Izuku yawned. It's not too last minute, is it? You can't teach when you're 2 seconds away from passing out. Head home. Izuku nodded. Thank you, Sir, Aizawa. Every doctor near UA and his house was busy or shut, so Izuku dragged his feet all the way to Katsuki's agency. He knew he could at least rely on his childhood friend. The lobby was busy when he walked in, but he immediately met eyes with the secretary. Midoriya, you're here early. I'm afraid the boss is out on patrol right now. He isn't scheduled to be back for another hour or so. That's okay, Izuku said, barely above a whisper. "I'll just go wait for him." The secretary stood up from behind her desk. "Midoriya, are you all right? You look like you're about to fall asleep." "I might," he chuckled. Her eyebrows scrunched up. "Look, Kacchan knows what's going on. I'll just be in his office waiting for him." Without another word, Izuku walked through the staff-only door, headed into Katsuki's office, and collapsed in his chair. He was out before he could close the office door behind him. Katsuki was working overtime, dealing with an irritating villain who had stolen an entire mall's worth of phones. Were these losers still so thick-headed that they thought a simple magnetic quirk would stop them from getting arrested? Katsuki was quick to apprehend the villain, and after dealing with the absolute headache of returning each phone to its owner, he headed back to his agency. It was well past sunset now. Deku had probably headed straight home. He didn't have the time to waste waiting for Katsuki to return to the agency and catch the train together. That means no coffee today, Katsuki thought. He could, of course, just go get it himself, but he preferred it when Deku brought it. His agency's lobby was empty, and the lights were already off, so the only thing illuminating the area was Solitaire's computer. She peered over the monitor and waved at her boss. "Dynamite, you're back. About time. I was losing hardcore to this bot." She showed her screen, which was the card game she was nicknamed after. Katsuki shook his head. "Yes, still kicking. You can get ready to go. I'll just put away my sheet." He started walking towards the staff door. "By the way, sir, that Midoriya Dash." "Yeah, I know. He wouldn't have stuck around this long." "No, I mean Dash." "It's fine, Dash. Sir, he's in your Dash. DKU." Deku jumped out of his sleep and grasped the armrests of the chair he'd slept in. Katsuki had seen that the door to his office had been left open, which was weird. He didn't like people snooping around. But the sight of Deku sleeping peacefully and curled up in his chair was definitely something he thought he was hallucinating. But he was very much real and started apologizing as soon as he saw Katsuki. Sorry, Kacchan," he squeaked. "I didn't mean to fall asleep. I was just going to wait around for you in the agency because I got let off early by Aizawa. But you were still on patrol, and I was fine with waiting, but you know that I've just been so tired lately, I couldn't keep my eyes open. Deku." He stopped rambling and looked at Katsuki with remorse, along with exhaustion. Despite waking up from what was at least a 6-hour nap, Deku still looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Katsuki was starting to get concerned for the BSRD. Why was he so fatigued? He was definitely dragging his useless but to the doctor first thing tomorrow, patrol bead med. Sighing, he held out his hand to Deku, who gingerly took it. He pulled his weary friend to his feet. "Let's just go home." The late-night sky was dark indigo, and the chill of winter was getting fiercer as the hours of the day slipped away. Deku and Katsuki walked towards the train station, and Deku was shivering. He walked close to Katsuki, trying to catch some of the warmth he naturally gave off. It was slightly annoying but tolerable. However, after Deku tripped over his feet one too many times, Katsuki snapped and turned around. Deku stepped back meekly. Sorry, Kacchan," he whispered. He really did look weak, and any frustration Katsuki had just felt melted away instantly. If he yelled at him, it would be akin to kicking a small puppy. Deku was not well. He didn't know what was wrong with him, but the strong, confident adult Katsuki knew so well seemed so much more frail in this light. For a split second, Katsuki could see the middle school version of Deku in front of him, that pathetic, quirkless loser who would not stop following him around. He closed his eyes to erase that vision, then looked at Deku again. His teeth were chattering, and even if he didn't have a fever now, he might catch his death in this condition. So Katsuki pulled off his puffy jumper and wrapped it around Deku, whose eyes widened in surprise. "Arms," Katsuki whispered, scared that a noise too loud might break the man in front of him. Deku hesitated, probably preparing to object to the offer, but he was just too tired. He put his arms into the sleeves and zipped up the front. His shivering stopped almost immediately. "Thank you," was all he could say. Katsuki turned around without a word and continued toward the train station. Deku promised that he would stay awake for the journey home, but as soon as the train began to move, he was out like a light again, and his head rested on Katsuki's shoulder. He should have been annoyed, but he was just concerned. The best course of action would be forcing Deku to stay at his house again so he could keep an eye on him. But Katsuki had a feeling Deku was already feeling like too much of a burden, so he'd insist on sleeping in his own bed tonight. Katsuki was tenacious, but the DMN nerd was almost as stubborn as he was. So he decided he would at least offer for him to stay the night to not seem like a jackass. As their final stop approached, Katsuki woke Deku up gently, and they silently walked to their apartment blocks. They were on Deku's side of the road, so he walked him into his apartment first. They stopped at the bottom of the stairwell. "You could stay over again if you're not feeling well," Katsuki offered. He already knew Deku would say no even before he saw him shaking his head. "You've already helped a lot, Kacchan," Deku said. "And I really appreciate it. Something is definitely wrong. Me being so tired like this isn't normal." "You don't say." Deku made a face. "But maybe just sleeping in my own bed will help." He tilted his head up more so he could see him eye to eye. Katsuki studied his face, every freckle, every blemish. The faded scar on the side of his cheek, similar to his own. His green eyes were wide and shiny, and the streetlight reflected in them. He could see his neck and blazer poking out from underneath the yellow jacket he'd given him. His mouth was slightly open as he breathed, creating clouds of hot air. Deku suddenly liked his soft, pink lips before looking down. "Have a good night, Kacchan." Katsuki felt arms surround him, and Deku's curls tickled his face as he leaned in and hugged him. He was frozen for a second. They were closer than they'd ever been, but hugging was still somewhat of a foreign concept. Robotically, he lifted his arms and placed one hand on Deku's head and one on his back. Deku squeezed him before letting go, flashing a quick smile at Katsuki and turning to go up the stairs. Katsuki ruffled around in his pocket for his keys, feeling frustrated when he didn't immediately feel the cold metal against his fingertips. He pulled his hand out of his pocket and pat himself down. He flipped his pockets inside out and stopped when he felt nothing but fabric, then slowly realized. He'd given Deku his jacket, hadn't he? And he'd always put his keys in his jacket, so he never left them in his hero costume by mistake. That meant his keys were across the street. Katsuki cursed and hit his door with his fist. He didn't want to disturb Deku. He'd seen how tired he was. And sure, he was tired too, but he knew from experience that teenage brats were almost as insufferable as villains. Plus, something was off about how exhausted Deku was. It was unnatural. He had managed to convince Katsuki to sleep in his own bed that night, but if it, something in his mind was telling him he needed to be with Deku, and it wasn't just the urge to unlock his own door. He sighed, walked down the stairs of his apartment block and crossed the street. It was a slight inconvenience, but he'd be lying if he wasn't a little bit happy to see Deku again. Maybe he could persuade him to let him stay the night. They had such little free time nowadays, and as much as he loved being a hero, it was all he'd wanted, wasn't it? He didn't want it to come at the cost of his friendship with Deku. A friendship he wasn't even sure he deserved. Sure, Katsuki had apologized and changed, and Deku had forgiven him, but he was truly terrible to Deku in their youth. Did he even deserve the forgiveness? He shook his head. He'd always have to live with the guilt, but if Deku wasn't bothered with it anymore and he kept making conscious efforts to be better, Katsuki knew there was no point dwelling in the past. Katsuki waited for a black car to pull out of the driveway of Deku's apartment before walking up to his friend's door. He knocked on the hardwood, expecting Deku's bright green eyes and smiling face to greet him, but instead, he was met with silence. He frowned. Surely Deku couldn't have passed out that fast? Yeah, he was tired and he'd passed out fast on the train, but he was walking and talking with Katsuki just fine less than 5 minutes ago. Plus, he was responsible. He would have at least changed out of his work clothes and taken a shower before collapsing into bed. There was no way Deku had done all that so fast. And a gnawing feeling in Katsuki's gut told him something was wrong. "Deku," he shouted. He didn't care about disturbing the other residents. "Open up, you have my keys." He continued banging on the door to no avail. He put his good ear to the door but couldn't hear anything. There was no TV and no footsteps. He cursed his stupid Quirk for damaging his hearing, even though his lack of care for his ears was his own fault, and pulled out his phone. Luckily, he hadn't left that in his jacket. He dialed Deku's number, and after about 4 agonizing rings, it picked up. "Deku, where the hell are you? You couldn't have gone far, you dumb nerd. I live less than a minute away dash." Katsuki was cut off as he heard low voices, a loud horn, and then the subtle click, indicating someone had hung up. It all happened in less than a second. He looked at his phone in shock, and the terrible feeling in his stomach pooled up so fast he felt as though he might vomit. His mind immediately went to the worst thought. Had Deku been abducted? Obviously, Deku was well known as the person who stopped Shigaraki and gave up his legendary power for the betterment of society. Still, he had somewhat adjusted to a humble life after becoming a teacher. Not like their classmates, who were showing up in the news and had their faces plastered everywhere. No, someone wanting to take Deku would have had to track him down. He wasn't a public figure at all anymore. Maybe once a month he got recognized. Katsuki gritted his teeth and kicked himself for not noticing. Surely, someone had been stalking him, and Katsuki was furious he hadn't spotted anyone following them. He hated the feeling of being watched. When Deku wasn't at UA, he was at home. When he wasn't at home, he was with Katsuki. They did groceries together, they got lunch together, and of course, the nerd texted him anytime he went out alone to do something so he could update him, wish he was there and send him pictures of the aquarium, of the new Kacchan place that opened, of the Hero Museum that had a plaque dedicated to the students in the Hero course and had Bakugo Katsuki and Midoriya Izuku written next to each other in beautiful gold font. Katsuki had been standing still for too long. He raised his phone to call the police and was about to get ready to leave when he had one single ember of hope. Maybe Deku was inside and passed out from exhaustion. Maybe he'd accidentally dialed the wrong number. He didn't like being wrong, but he had to check, just in case. He sighed and wrapped his hand around the bronze doorknob, heating up his palm. The metal started to melt, and soon Katsuki could force open the door and see inside Deku's house. "Izuku, if you're asleep in here, I owe you a new door," he thought. "And I'm also going to kill you for making me think you were kidnapped." The lights were off. The TV was black. Deku's house had barely more furniture than Katsuki's own, and it was all in the same space it had always been. He went straight for Deku's bedroom, but the sheets were perfect. He was at Katsuki's house all of last night. Deku had done his bed the previous morning, and it hadn't been touched since. Katsuki's blood ran cold as he frantically checked every other room in the small space and came up empty-handed. He stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. The small shoe shelf next to the door caught his eye, and he saw that the only pair of shoes there were Deku's house slippers. He hadn't come in and changed from his work shoes. Katsuki caught bile in his throat and angrily swallowed it, ignoring the acidic taste. He dialed the police in the area that directly answered to his agency, explosive sweat dripping from his brow. "Dynamite," came the voice on the other line. "Is everything all right? You're off duty, and we have patrol cover dash." "It's Deku," Katsuki interrupted, not caring how rude he was. He's missing." "Deku?" repeated the officer. "He's the one you travel to work with, right? Your childhood friend?" "Yes," he said breathlessly. "I walked home with him, and when he went to his house and I went to mine, I realized we'd swapped jackets." Katsuki wasn't about to admit he'd given him his own jacket out of an affectionate attempt to warm him up. "So my house keys were in my pocket. I went back to get them, and he literally lives across the street, mind you. Takes less than a minute to get there. But when I got here, he didn't answer the door and I just got inside. He's not here either, and I don't think he even entered his house." "Okay." Katsuki could hear the clacking of the keyboard. "Wait, how did you get in?" Katsuki scowled. "I think finding Deku is more important, don't you agree?" "Yes, sir, sorry, just wondering out loud." "Sorry, what's his real name?" "Your friend?" "Izuku Midoriya." Katsuki didn't realize how dry his throat was until he swallowed. He hadn't called Deku his real name consistently in a while, let alone call him Midoriya. That was for people who didn't know him, who didn't have the connection he had with him. He called him Izuku for a few years but switched back to calling him Deku after graduation because he knew how much it meant to him to reclaim the terrible nickname Katsuki had given him into the name of a hero. When his dream of being a hero died, so did his hero name. Sure, Occasionally he was recognized and called Deku from memory, but that wasn't the same as being the hero Deku, who saved people with unwavering determination. Feeling responsible, Katsuki continued to call him his hero name. No longer was it the demeaning nickname he'd intended it to be. And he knew Deku liked it. Plus, when he saved Azug for more important times, like this morning, it had more of an impact, and he always smirked when Deku's eyes lit up and his pink cheeks formed dimples at the sound of his real name. Focus, damn it. Katsuki hissed at himself. The officer was still typing, and the silence was beginning to bother him. He opened his mouth to urge the officer to hurry up, but as he did, he heard a sigh, and the clacking stopped. Okay, I've sent officers to your house since the matter is so close to the area. I'll explain the call to the officers en route so they know the situation. Just stay put until they arrive. Katsuki opened his mouth to thank the officer, but nothing came out. He tried to force his voice, but now he'd been quiet too long. He sighed and dropped his phone from his ear. Dynamite. The officer's voice came from his phone again, and he pulled his hand back up. Yeah. I'm sorry this happened to Midoriya. I've spoken to him a few times, he's really lovely. I hope it's nothing and you find him fast. Thank you. I will find him. I don't doubt your skill, sir. The police had an ETA of 3 minutes, which was 3 minutes too long in Katsuki's eyes. He stood in the stairwell, taking deep breaths and trying to calm the F down so he didn't blow the entire building up while he waited for them to show up. Deku was gone. Deku had been taken. He was furious. He knew what Deku's condition was, and he'd just let him go home by himself? He looked like he was about to kneel over and die, and Katsuki had just let him go? What kind of fake but hero was he? It took all his self-control not to ignite the sweat dripping from his palms. He talked all this big sheet and couldn't even protect the person closest to him. Someone who lived less than a minute away and who he had seen only 5 minutes before he realized he was missing. Well, there was the smallest silver lining in this dog's hit situation. He'd left Deku's side for less than 5 minutes and reported him missing in less than 10. 10 minutes was certainly enough time to inflict some damage, but it could have potentially been hours before anyone realized he was gone. Katsuki's blood ran cold again, imagining the morbid possibilities that arose in his mind. If he hadn't left his keys in his pocket, what then? He would have wondered why Deku was late turning up to his doorstep the following morning. He would have gone to his house and knocked with no answer. He would report him missing, but by that point, it would have been hours. He could be miles away, alone, scared, injured, dead. Katsuki slapped himself. No, there was no way Deku was dead. He would pull that motherfucker out of the grave and kill him himself before he ever died before Katsuki did. Deku would not have been taken quietly. He had been trained to fight. But then, Katsuki realized that Deku was like a car running on empty. He had no stamina. The pieces started coming together for him, and his chest filled with rage. He'd always had the voice of Best Jeanist in the back of his mind. Keep an eye on your heart, young Bakugo. You're alive by work of a miracle. You've been given a second chance at life. Don't waste it by getting mad about something stupid. Pieces of information flew around Katsuki's mind as he tried to comprehend what had happened to Deku while also keeping his heart rate down. It was like a tightrope walker trying to balance on a string of thread nearly impossible not to topple over. He managed to get this from his foggy mind. Deku had started feeling tired yesterday afternoon, but not when Katsuki had brought him lunch. He was fine then. So something might have happened between lunch and arriving at his agency. He hadn't mentioned anything. At least it gave him a time frame. So, Deku had been feeling this overwhelming fatigue since then, and it hadn't gone away. Deku wasn't as strong as he used to be when wielding One for All, but he was a UA teacher. He had to be able to keep up with his students. So he could definitely defend himself if he had to. Had someone intentionally worn him down so he was vulnerable? Katsuki bit his lip in frustration and DMN near drew blood. He should have stayed with Deku. He shouldn't have left his side. For a moment, what had been done to him that made him powerless? A drag? A quirk? His mind was racing faster and faster, and he had to force himself to calm down. If he had any sort of complication, he wouldn't be in prime condition to murder the F out of the people that had taken Deku. So, Out of spite, he started taking deep breaths. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the police cars pull into the apartment's parking lot, and he stood up from the stairwell. Finally. Along with the officers, Todoroki and Kirishima also showed up. They had both been working night shifts and were assigned to help. Katsuki told all involved what had happened, and he was so full of rage at the end he was nearly spitting his words out. The officers went upstairs to look for clues in Deku's apartments and to question neighbors while Todoroki, Kirishima and one detective got more details from Katsuki. "So, you gave him your keys, that right?" questioned the detective. "No, you moron, I gave him my jacket." "The keys are in the jacket," he corrected. "And do your keys have any sort of tracking device on them?" Katsuki blinked in shock. Of course they don't. "If they did, you guys, I'd be chasing down Deku myself," he barked. "Bakugo, calm down," urged Todoroki. "You tell me how the F I'm supposed to be calm when Deku was stolen from me right under my goddamn nose, icy hot." "We're trying to help, man," pleaded Kirishima. "We want Midoriya safe too. Just tell us exactly what happened before you called." "I already told you," Katsuki growled. "I was at my door, realized I didn't have my keys, came over to Deku's house and knocked. He didn't answer, so I rang him. The call cut off, so I went inside. He wasn't there. End of story." "You rang him?" The detective looked up from his notepad. "As in, the call went through?" "Yeah, dumbass, I just said that. But it got cut off." "And what did you hear before they hung up?" Katsuki paused. "Voices. I didn't hear any words. And then a horn from a car, or maybe a truck." The officers returned and stood in the stairwell. "We just questioned everyone in this block. No one saw anything. Something was wrong with Midoriya's doorknob dash." "That was me," Katsuki said bluntly. "That's how I got in." "Oh. Well, what have you got down here?" "Dynamite called Izuku Midoriya's phone," said the detective. "I think his captors may have answered briefly before hanging up. We may be able to trace the call." He turned to Katsuki. "Can you give me your phone and come with us to the station, Dynamite?" Still seething with rage, Katsuki handed over his phone, which was placed in an evidence bag and sealed up. The detective nodded. "I'll try to get this back to you as quickly as possible." Katsuki's eye twitched. "Oh yeah, focus on getting my FNG phone back before Deku. Good job. I don't give a shit about that, just find him." "Bakugo!" Kirishima scolded. The detective was unmoved. He probably dealt with more irritable people than Katsuki on a daily basis. But Katsuki couldn't bring himself to apologize. He was enraged. It felt like the longer he spent away from Deku, the less composure he had. He just wanted to know if he was safe. The things that could be happening to him buried their way into Katsuki's head and were driving him insane. Not even knowing for sure that Deku was alive made him GG. He was starting to panic. Kirishima was leading him down the driveway where the police cars were stationed. He tried to coax him into the car when Katsuki suddenly remembered something. "Wait." Katsuki turned to the detective. "When I came over, I had to wait for a car to pass out of the driveway. It was a black one sheet. I think the license plate number was F-9502 or 6502. He had an unconscious habit of memorizing plates. It helped when chasing down villains on patrol. However, he knew jack shit about actual cars. Don't fucking ask me what type of model it was or whatever, I haven't got a DMN clue. But it might belong to the fuckers who took Deku." The detective nodded and scribbled something down in his notebook. He talked into his radio, but Katsuki's head was spinning. All the stress had caught up to him. Somehow, Kirishima got him into the police car without any objections. He had a supportive hand on his back, and Katsuki let him keep it there. His mind was running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but he had no energy to voice any of his thoughts. The car ride seemed to take years, but they were actually at the station in a few minutes. Kirishima tried to talk to him, but it was like his voice was in an empty cave. It echoed around Katsuki's head faintly, and he wasn't even paying attention to the words he spoke. He felt like he wasn't even in control of his own body as he was marched into the police station and told to wait. He couldn't even muster up the energy to be angry at not contributing. Kirishima and Todoroki sat on either side of him, trying to make him feel better. There was nothing they could say to him that would cheer him up at all. There was only one thing on his mind, one person who he knew he had to protect no matter what. Save and win. Win and save. I'm going to find you. As Izuku slowly re-entered consciousness, he struggled to keep his head off the cold concrete floor. Blurry colors danced around his vision, and he had to blink many times until he could see clearly again. He sat up, head throbbing, and he felt strain on his wrists and legs. Turning around, he saw he was chained to a pipe on the wall with his hands and feet locked in HNDCFFS. He was only wearing his white button-up shirt and work pants. He tried to speak but felt a fabric tightly wrapped around his mouth. Now more alert, Izuku examined his surroundings. All the walls were the same shade of gray. There were a few pipes on the ceiling and a deteriorating wooden staircase on the far side of the room with a trapdoor leading to the upper floor. There was nothing else, no boxes or furniture. However, in the corner opposite Izuku's, he spotted a bundle of clothes. Squinting, Izuku made out that in the pile were his blazer, his tie, his shoes, Katsuki's jacket. He was violently pulled back into the last thing he remembered before blacking out. He had just said goodbye to Katsuki and was walking up the stairs to his home. It felt like every step was a challenge as his body begged him just to lie down and sleep. But he mustered up the energy to reach his door and began feeling around in his bag for his keys. Every blink of his eyes lasted longer, and he couldn't keep his legs steady. The last thing he could remember was hitting his head on the ground and seeing a pair of shoes walking up the stairs. Izuku desperately tried to remember more, but that was it. So he'd passed out on his doorstep. What had happened that led him here? He tried to imagine what time it was, how long it had been since he passed out. But there was no natural light in the room. The only thing that stopped him from being in total darkness was the smallest light bulb swaying from the ceiling. Despite having just woken up, Izuku felt more alert than ever. The fatigue that had been clouding his mind over the last day and a half had cleared, and he was fully awake. He couldn't help but think about Katsuki. Where was he? Did he know Izuku was here? Had he noticed he never made it home? He had no sense of time, but the soonest Katsuki would have noticed he was missing would be if he didn't show up for their walk to the train station the next day. That brought on another thought: work. His students? Izuku's heart started racing. He prayed they were safe. He didn't know why he was here, but he was determined to only let it affect him. He wasn't letting anyone get hurt for his sake. His only hope was to stay alert. So he replayed the events from the previous day in his mind, hoping that some event would stand out or that one piece of information would help him. Before getting to his house, he was with Katsuki. He had hugged him. He had turned down his offer to stay over again. His head pounded at the idea of Katsuki being involved and hurt as a result of this. Izuku didn't know why he was here, but he felt lucky to be alone if it meant he was the only target. After losing One for All, a deeply insecure part of him was angry that he no longer had the power to save those he loved. He still had the reflexes and would jump into danger in a heartbeat to save anyone, but there were some things he just couldn't overcome without a quirk. He often had nightmares about every dangerous situation he could have found himself in, and they always ended with him being too weak to rescue anyone. A flaming car crash, where he wasn't fast enough to save the passengers before the vehicle exploded. A cliffside accident, where he no longer had Black Whip to use to save the person falling. Izuku's most recurring nightmare was one where he relived the moment of arriving at the coffin in the sky, ready to fight Shigaraki. He recalled the memory of seeing Katsuki's corpse lying motionless on the ground, and how he had lost his mind at the sight. But in this nightmare's version of events, he never regained control, and all his quirks left his body. He was just a pathetic 16-year-old boy again who couldn't do anything on his own. The ending to that dream was often him waking up in a cold sweat. Izuku tried to ignore these memories and instead focused on his surroundings, keeping an ear out for his captors. Izuku stayed awake for hours, listening and hoping for any sort of sign of life or clue as to where he was. Sometimes, he heard the very distant sound of a car horn, but that was it. He tried to scream out a few times, but the fabric around his mouth deafened his voice. He was getting tired, real tired this time, but he was not going to fall asleep until he found out why he was there. After 3 hours, 56 minutes and 18 seconds, he heard a door on the upper floor open. He jerked his head up and began glaring at the staircase. Sure enough, he heard the clicking of a padlock, and the trapdoor opened. Two men, one short and one tall, entered the basement area, both hiding their faces with masks and hoods. "Izuku Midoriya," said the tall one. He reached out to Izuku's face, and he instinctively flinched as the stranger pulled down the GG around his mouth. "What do you want? Who are you?" Izuku demanded, shocked at how gravelly his voice sounded. He suddenly became aware of his thirst. His throat felt like sandpaper when he tried to swallow. "We obviously won't be telling you our real names," the taller one continued. "But if you must address us, I am Yukai and he is Han." Han, a plump, middle-aged man, seemed to be smiling under his mask if his squinted eyes were anything to go by. Izuku narrowed his eyes. "Han, is it? What's so funny, huh?" "Just how easy it was to capture you," he chuckled. "I'll admit, you gave us a bit of a fright when you weren't at your house last night, but we knew you'd come home eventually." Izuku froze. Just how long had they been watching him? They had been staking out his house? And if he hadn't stayed with Katsuki, they would have kidnapped him earlier. Did that mean they had eyes on him, too? His stomach dropped at the thought. "What do you want?" Izuku repeated. "We want what everyone does," said Yukai. "Power. And you, Izuku Midoriya, have more power in you than anyone else." Izuku stared back at him in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Han laughed. "It may have been 8 years ago, but don't tell me you've forgotten about being a hero entirely, Deku." That word clued Izuku into exactly who he was talking to. His eyes widened, and his heart burned with anger. "You were on the street." "Bingo!" He removed his mask and hood, and Izuku recognized the man he had bumped into on the street 2 days before. He no longer looked innocent, his eyes were hollow and sunken, and his skin was frighteningly pale. "You have the soul of a true hero, Midoriya, unlike some of your peers. Fake heroes who only go after the most flashy crimes, so they end up with the fattest paychecks. But, of course, you would spend a minute of your day helping a poor old man who had fallen over on the sidewalk. What did you do to me?" Izuku fumed. "See, I always wanted to help others, but no one paid attention to me because I just couldn't fight well enough," Han started. "But I knew my quirk was useful in other ways. It's called fatigue. The person I touch starts to feel increasingly tired, and I can control the speed at which the fatigue sets in. And the fun part is, it doesn't wear off until I touch you again. No matter how long you sleep, you'll still be tired." He laughed at the expression of frustration on Izuku's face. "We know you must have at least some of your previous fighting experience from your years as a hero," Yukai explained. "This was simply so we could get you here without a real problem." Izuku was seething with anger. He didn't want to get caught up in villains like this. He had adjusted his life to be more down to earth. He taught students. He worked hard. Hung out with his friends. He didn't want to be used as a pawn piece like this. He was not anything more than an ordinary person anymore. He bit his tongue so he didn't say something he would regret, took a deep breath, and then faced his captors again. "You still haven't told me what you want," he said slowly. "What does you wanting power have to do with me?" "Around 8 years ago, we heard through the grapevine about a group that was using human DNA to create bullets that erase people's quirks," Yukai said. "The group went silent after a while, but it got us thinking. What if we could create something similar but instead use human DNA to create an injection to grant quirks? Using you, we could extract one for all and grant ourselves the power of All Might himself," cried Han. "And we don't have to worry about trial and error since we've got all the time in the world now that you're here." Fear crept through every bone in Izuku's body. He remembered that sweet little girl Eri and how terrified she was after Mirio, and he had saved her from overhaul. The layers of bandages on her arms and legs and the panic in her eyes all flowed throughout Izuku now. He gritted his teeth, determined not to show how he felt. He was strong. He was not going to become some sort of human experimentation for these lunatics. "And how much do you even know about my quirk?" he asked slowly. "You stockpile power and use it to power up your attacks and speed," Yukai replied. "It's quite simple. I've run some tests before, and I believe I know where to start. He walked over to Izuku and undid the HNDCFFS, keeping him bound to the pipe on the wall. He gripped his arms tight and threw him across the room, where Han tapped him on the shoulder. Instantly, he felt like his veins were full of cement, and every muscle in his body had torn. His stamina had been drained, and he couldn't even stand up. "It's useful, isn't it?" Han snickered. "When I took your hand the other day, I had your fatigue set in at a rate of 60% over a few hours. But there was 100% in just a second. Really takes the wind out of you, doesn't it?" It took all of Izuku's willpower to keep his eyes open and not fall asleep as he was forced into a chair and strapped down, his hands tightly restrained to the armrests. As the last knot was tied, Han touched him again, and he felt his energy return slowly. "You're wasting your time, you know," Izuku panted, raising his head. Sweat fell from his head and ran down his neck. "I don't even have one for all anymore." Yukai looked at him, unimpressed. "We'll see." "It's true." Yukai scoffed. "Truth. See, that's where my area of expertise is." He pulled down his mask and removed his hood for the first time, and his unobscured face was displayed. He could not have been older than Izuku, which scared him. His dark maroon hair fell elegantly over his shoulders, and his piercing black eyes showed no sense of humanity when he looked at him. Yukai held up a hand and pulled off one of the white gloves he had been wearing before taking one of Izuku's bound hands in his own and staring right into his soul. "So, Izuku Midoriya, how exactly does your quirk function?" Izuku couldn't stop the words coming out of his mouth. "It's passed down from person to person. I store power in my body and use it for attacking and mobility." It must be his quirk, he thought angrily. "HM. And how can it be passed along?" "Through any type of DNA. Does blood work?" "Yes." "I see. And you still have it, don't you? Don't try to lie dash." "No, I lost it 8 years ago." A flash of confusion on Yukai's face made Izuku's chest swell with satisfaction. He looked down at their intertwined hands, then back up at his face. "People don't lose quirks," he hissed. "They're stored in your DNA. Even if your quirk was passed to you, there would still be an ember of it inside you. I lost those too. 5 years ago." For once, Izuku was happy to be pissing someone off. Words spilled out of his mouth uncontrollably. "Why do you think I'm a teacher? If I had my quirk, I would still be a hero." Yukai released his hand in disgust. "I guess I shouldn't take your words as absolutes. You know nothing about this subject. I will still extract the remaining power of one for all and take it for myself." He turned to Han, who had been watching the scene from the sidelines. "Tools." Izuku felt any positive feelings he had melting away as Yukai put his gloves back on and approached him with a small vial and a sharp scalpel. He pushed Izuku's sleeves up, revealing the old scars that tattooed his arms. He looked at his prisoner like a wild animal, preparing to attack. A sinister grin spread across his face as he pushed the blade to Izuku's flesh. "I can't stand crybabies," he rasped. "So don't you make a sound." Izuku clenched his jaw tight as his skin was lacerated and warm. Crimson blood trickled down his arm, filling the taunting, sterile vial. Katsuki was getting restless. He had given the investigators his phone over 3 hours ago and had not heard a single word from them yet. It was now a high-profile case since Deku was considered to be a public figure and may have been kidnapped for some sort of ransom. Katsuki was angry, but he tried not to focus on the wrong thing. Focus too much on what Deku might be going through, and he would break down and lose it. Focus on how he was going to murder the F out of the people that had taken him, and he could keep his head relatively clear. Todoroki and Kirishima were still in the waiting area with him. They had tried to talk to him a little and calm him down, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Once Katsuki was in his own head, nothing was going to distract him. After waiting for hours and talking himself out of blowing the entire FNG station up, Katsuki heard the investigator's door open. Out came the detectives, a few officers, and, to his surprise, Jairu and Shinso. "What the F? When did you two get here?" he spluttered. He had not noticed them arrive. "About half an hour ago," Jairu responded. "We asked for them specifically," said the detective. "So, dynamite. The call was traced to a highway nearby, and we had eyes on the phone's location, but it looks like it was destroyed. However, we still have a good estimate of where Midoriya and his captors may be. We put out an alert for the car you described, and one witness reported seeing the plates out in an abandoned field off the highway. So, have you found Midoriya yet? Asked Kirishima. The car was recovered, but there was no one inside. Many buildings around that area are also abandoned with the field, like warehouses and silos, so we're going to head out to investigate them. Great, amazing. Katsuki pushed the others out of the way and headed to the door. Let's get going then. Hold on, came Jiru's voice from behind him. I'm not waiting for Dash. Katsuki felt his entire body go numb as he stopped dead in his tracks, hand hovering over the door handle. Sorry, Bakugo. Shinsu's unmasked voice reverberated in his ears. The BSTRD had imitated Jiru's voice and used his quirk to brainwash him. In his anger, Katsuki had forgotten. We just need you to listen to the plan before you march off alone. Turn around and walk back over here. Katsuki's body was forced to obey Shinsu's words, and he rejoined the group. He wanted to yell and scream and sock that purple-haired loser in the mouth for getting one over him, but he was made to stay silent and listen. The people involved will be the police, Dynamite, Earphone Jack, Shoto, Red Riot and myself, began Shinso. We will join the team already investigating the abandoned car and assist them in searching the nearby buildings for Midoriya. We pros will assess the situation once we believe we have located him. Earphone Jack can tell us how many people we are dealing with. We will attempt to rescue Midoriya as smoothly as possible, so no attacking unless absolutely necessary. He stared straight at Katsuki, who was fuming internally. If all goes according to plan Dash, continued Shinso, we will lure the abductor out, where I will instantly brainwash and restrain them. If there are multiple, I can also ask one of them to lead me to where they are keeping Midoriya. We will recover him, then leave the kidnappers to the police and Midoriya to the paramedics. He looked at Katsuki and broke his brainwash. He scowled and took a step forward. That's all fine and dandy, Purple Locks, he growled. But you're saying this without knowing what kind of condition Deku is in. You think they're just letting him sit on their couch with his feet up? You don't think they've just locked him up in a room with no food or water, doing God knows what to him? Shinso merely blinked. I'm trying to stay positive. Katsuki rolled his eyes. Positive? Fing hell. He turned to the other pros, then threw his hands up impatiently. Well, are we effing leaving or not? Katsuki, there are dozens of ways we can practice managing your anger. It's not a one-shoe-fits-all sort of situation. And what if I tell you that none of them work for me? Is that true? No. Which ones work for you? Only one method you've given me works. Sometimes. Let's focus on that one. What helps you the most? Breathing. The frigid wind was harsh against Katsuki's face as he propelled himself through the sky towards the abandoned field. The heroes tagging along had tried to get him in the car, but he was desperate for some fresh air. He needed to be free and not trapped in a car with 4 other people sneaking glances at him the entire trip. They'd agreed to let Katsuki use his explosions to fly to the Rendivis as long as he waited for them to show up if he got there first. He'd reluctantly agreed to their terms and shot off into the air. The words of one of his therapists echoed in his mind. He hated the idea of being treated like a patient when there wasn't anything physically wrong with him. So many professionals refused to treat him. However, one of them had focused less on trying to change his ways and how to manage his emotions. He was a long way from perfect, but he'd improved. And despite it being years since he saw this therapist, hell, he'd even forgotten her name, what an a-hole he was. Her advice on what to do when his anger started to get out of control stuck with him. Katsuki hated that she was right. But when he focused on his breathing, and only on his breathing, he could get himself to calm down. He was determined to keep his cool until he found Deku. Once he was safe, then he could rage at the evil fuckers who'd taken him. He wouldn't kill them. He'd just get really close to it. Katsuki let every muscle in his body relax, only concentrating on the palms of his hands and detonating his explosions in perfect timing to remain airborne. It had been a long time since he was actually nervous about a mission. Since villains were starting to die down, and quirks and their societal impact were more understood, Katsuki primarily dealt with small-time thugs and covert operations. He'd never been assigned to help in a kidnapping, which was probably for the best. They didn't mesh well with his personality. But this was now the most stressed he'd been at work in ages. And as much as he didn't want to admit it, it was solely because Deku was the victim. No matter how much breathing he did, a voice in his head would always worm its way into his conscious thoughts, describing all the horrible things Deku may have already gone through. He'd already had vivid imagery of what he might find when they raided the buildings, and he really did not want to think about it. Instead of getting mad, which he was, Katsuki focused on inhaling and exhaling over and over. Once he was zeroed in on that, his graphic imagination faded. And soon he saw the red and blue flashes of police cars in the field, which was probably the search team that had left before them. He let himself fall back to earth, hitting the rough ground hard. As he solemnly acknowledged the officers, he heard another car pull up and the pros assigned to help spilled out. They nodded and headed off in the direction of the first building to search. If the detectives had been right about the phone tracing, there were only 3 places in the area they could check before hitting a dead end again. The first structure they searched, a silo, showed nothing. The second was a shed, which they didn't even have to investigate since the building was missing most of its walls. The third place was the furthest away, an abandoned power station that stood on a hill alongside rows of deteriorating wind turbines. It was deeper into the field, and luscious trees were starting to grow, which acted as perfect cover for the heroes to hide in. They surveyed the area for a few minutes, circling the building and finding the best way in. Jairu was low to the ground with her earphone jack plugged deep into the earth. Katsuki impatiently tapped his finger to his arm, eager to get inside and find Deku. "Do you hear anything?" Todoroki asked as Jairu stood up, reeling in her jack to her ear. "It's hard for me to tell from so far," she started. "But I'm pretty sure there's 2 people in there. I couldn't distinguish any voices, so I don't know if either is Midoriya." "Phew. Easy." Katsuki stepped forward, making small crackles of orange ignite from his palm. "Let me go in and F them up." "No." Shinso put an arm out in front of him. "We have a plan to stick to. I will go first, as I explained to you, and try to lure them out and incapacitate them with brainwash. Todoroki and Jairu will stay out here, listening for them and trapping them if they manage to escape. Kirishima and Bakugo, I will give you the heads up when we can head inside." Katsuki clenched his jaw and swallowed his pride. "Fine." Shinso nodded. "Thank you. Remember, Bakugo, we want the same thing as you. The top priority is to save Midoriya." The group watched Shinso walk up the small hill and knock on the front door. A few seconds later, a short man appeared, angrily yelling at the hero. It was too far to hear anything they were saying, but after a few moments, the man seemed to stop shouting and began slowly making his way over to the group. Once he was close, Todoroki entrapped him in his ice, and Katsuki saw Shinso waving at him and Kirishima to move in. "Be careful," Todoroki urged. Katsuki rolled his eyes and ran through the grass, meeting Shinso at the door. "Just be quiet and follow me," he instructed. He didn't say anything about Midoriya, but he looked extremely nervous when he realized I was a pro. "We just need to detain this other person." "Don't tell me this obvious sheet," Katsuki hissed. Kirishima shot him a pleading look that said, "Chill out, man." He averted his gaze and kept his mouth shut. The building was in poor condition, with mold and dust in every corner of the room. It had water damage on the ceiling, and there was no way a human was living in the place comfortably. Katsuki had to breathe through his mouth to avoid the rancid smell. The trio turned the corner when they saw a tall, slim man walking down the hallway towards them. He froze and looked mortified, immediately taking a step back. Who are you?" His long hair fell over his eyes, giving him a dark and eerie look. "What the hell are you doing here? What's your name?" Shinso asked, mimicking Kirishima's voice. "Why would I dash?" The man stopped dead in his tracks, arms falling limp to the side. Shinso adjusted his persona cords and turned to his allies. "See if you can find anything. A hidden door or something." "Right." Kirishima rushed off, but Katsuki couldn't get his feet to move. He was staring at Deku's captor. What disturbed him the most was that he didn't even look over the age of and more. He was a toothpick that Deku could have broken in half if it was necessary to defend himself. How could this skinny little sheet and that old fart have gotten their hands on Deku, the bravest, strongest, and most selfless person he knew? No, they had done something to him to make him more vulnerable. They had to hinder him because they knew they wouldn't stand a chance. His whole body was stiff with rage, and he glared at him until Kirishima returned empty-handed. "Sorry, man," he apologized. "I couldn't find anything. I went upstairs and there was nothing." Shinso turned to the man he held captive and sighed. It's hard to know exactly what wording will command them since every situation differs. "Let me try something." He took a step back. "Walk us to where your prisoner is." The man didn't move a muscle. "Walk us to where Izuku Midoriya is." Still nothing. Shinso reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and typed something in. Katsuki peered over and saw that he had pulled up a photo of Deku. "Walk us to where this person is." He put the picture of Deku up to the man's face, and after a second, he turned around and started walking. Katsuki and Shinso both grinned, and they watched as he removed a rug from the worn-down living room, revealed a trapdoor and lifted it up. "Stop moving." The man stopped, and Shinso turned to Kirishima and Katsuki. "I'll watch him. Get Midoriya back." When Katsuki saw the state of Deku in the basement, he held his stomach to resist the urge to vomit. Deku was half awake and tied to a chair, with the only illumination coming from a dying light bulb in the middle of the room. His head was ped to the side, and his eyes were half-lidded. He looked pale, and his arms had cuts all over them. Blood stained the sleeves of his normally snow-white shirt. Katsuki sprinted down the staircase and pushed his ear to Deku's chest. He heard the weak thudding of his heart and felt relief seep through his entire body. "Hang on, man. I'll cut the ropes." Kirishima's voice was shaking as he hardened his hand and sliced through the retrains on Deku's limbs. When Katsuki pulled away, he felt a warmness on the side of his face and put his hand on it to feel it. Bringing his hand down, he saw blood coating his fingertips. He jerked his head back up towards Deku's chest, which he saw had a sharp cut across it, along with the smudge he had made with his face, and he inhaled sharply. Kirishima finished cutting the bindings, and Deku flopped forward. Katsuki caught him before he fell face-first on the floor and wrapped his arms around him tightly. In that moment, he never wanted to let go of Deku again. "I've got you," he gasped. He never believed in any sort of god, but he sent his prayers up into the sky, thanking every divine power that could exist for bringing Deku back to him alive. "Be mindful of any injuries," came Shinso's voice. He had wrapped the slim man in his binding cloth and still had his brainwashing activated. "Huff," Katsuki hissed. He felt Deku's soft breath in the crook of his neck and couldn't be more grateful for the feeling. It was in his left ear, so it was a little hard to hear. But when Katsuki felt Deku's mouth moving against the skin of his shoulder, he realized Deku was trying to tell him something. "Older human," Deku breathed. His quirk. "The other guy did this to you? That's why you can't stand?" Katsuki urged. Deku nodded ever so slightly. He's gotta," he paused and swallowed. "Timmy, reverse it." Katsuki wrapped one arm under Deku's legs and one arm around his back and scooped him up. "Kacchan," Deku murmured. Katsuki looked down at the man in his arms. "I'm here," he answered. "I'm not gonna drop you, nerd." Deku shook his head. "Corner." He vaguely tilted his head. Katsuki followed his gaze and saw a bundle of clothes in the corner of the room. The yellow jacket he'd given Deku and his bright red shoes were there. "I'm sorry," Deku whispered. "Your jacket?" Katsuki sighed and shook his head. "Don't worry about the stupid jacket." He turned to Kirishima. "Grab that stuff from the corner. It's Deku's." Kirishima nodded and collected the bundle of clothes in his arms. Shinso nodded and turned to leave, but he took a step forward at the same time as Katsuki. In their scuffle, Deku, who was in Katsuki's arms, knocked against Shinso's bindings. "Watch it," Katsuki shot at him. "How about you let me go first since I've got the villain? How about you let me take Deku out of this shithole?" "Bakugo." Shinso fell back, and Katsuki looked at the villain, who was snapped out of his brainwashing. He grasped the binding cloth in one hand and reached for a knife in the other. "You're not taking him back alive." He gripped the knife and sprinted towards Katsuki, preparing to strike the vulnerable Deku in his arms. Shinso scrambled to his feet and tried to wrap the cloth around the villain's hand, but missed. Katsuki, in one fluid motion, spun on one foot and kicked high with the other, still clutching Deku tightly in his arms. The kick connected and hit the jaw of his attacker, knocking him back down onto the ground. Katsuki stood up from crouching and let out a short breath. Shinso restrained the villain on the floor, binding him tightly. "Jesus, man," said Kirishima, stunned. "I didn't know you could kick like that." "Did you think I was just gonna drop Deku, you moron?" he shot back. Deku was disoriented by what had just happened. He could barely open his eyes, and Katsuki turned towards the stairs. "Let's get the F out of here." The two captured villains were confirmed to be the only people involved and were quickly detained. An ambulance was also provided for Deku, who had minor physical injuries. The main concern was for his mental health and how his body had deteriorated after being captured for nearly 12 hours. The villain with the fatigue quirk was forced to reverse the effects he had inflicted on Deku, and he was becoming more alert by the second. He was being treated by paramedics on the scene since his wounds were not too severe. Katsuki refused to leave his side and was getting dirty looks from the workers since he was in the way. Katsuki could not have given a single F-. "Do you think you're alert enough to answer some questions, Midoriya?" one of the paramedics asked. "The detectives just have a few for you when you're ready." I think so. Maybe in a few minutes." He was still a little woozy. As the faux fatigue wore off, the doctors assessed his actual condition. He had lost quite a significant amount of blood, but he had a needle in his left arm, and he would recover from everything. "We will probably have to transport you to a hospital as well," another medic said. "Just to get you on fluids and have more blood available. You'll probably only be there for a day or so." "That's fine," Deku said. Katsuki studied his friend. His eyes had deep bags, and his face was covered in dirt. The blood-stained shirt had been discarded, and he was wearing a simple blue polo they had spare in the ambulance. Katsuki reached into the ambulance for a hand towel and sat beside him. Deku turned to face him, and he started rubbing the grime from his cheeks. "Kacchan, thank you," he said. "For coming to save me." Katsuki scoffed. "Of course I was going to come and get you. Wouldn't be much of a hero if I didn't." I should have realized something was wrong sooner," Deku sighed. He tried to lower his gaze, but Katsuki tilted his chin back up so he could keep cleaning him off. "They were watching me. They were going to try taking me that night I stayed at your place. I was so worried they had intentions to hurt you too. I'd blow them up before they set one foot inside my house," Katsuki huffed. He pulled his hand away from Deku's face, which looked a lot cleaner. Deku smiled wordlessly and grabbed a few of the wet wipes the medics had provided for him. He brought one up to the dried blood that still lingered on Katsuki's cheek and wiped it off. Katsuki didn't say a word as he cleaned his face. He looked down at Deku's chest, which had been cleaned of the blood from the wound, but the image of the thin red scratch lingered in his mind. "What the hell did these freaks want from you?" "I could ask you the same, Midoriya." The detective in charge came over to the ambulance where Deku and Katsuki were. "Hello, I was in charge of the case today. Is it okay if I ask you some questions?" Deku nodded. "That's okay. But, is it okay if K-Dynamite stays here?" Of course. He was a big part of the operation after all. "Now, just try to tell me everything you remember." Deku explained everything he knew, that this was a calculated plan to kidnap him, how they had been stalking him for at least a few days prior, how they had intended to use his DNA to extract his now-defunct quirk, how they had intentionally made Deku more susceptible to being kidnapped with a quirk. He even told the detective how their plan was futile in the first place, explaining how One for All worked and how it had been extinguished years ago. "I see," pondered the detective. "I've always wondered about your quirk, Midoriya. It's the same as All Might's, isn't it?" "Yes. We revealed some of its properties when it came into the public eye, but there's clearly some misinformation out there. And that's what led to this. That's all I needed from you, Midoriya. Thank you." The detective flipped his notepad shut and then gave Katsuki a short nod. And thank you very much for your help, Dynamite. This mission went very smoothly, thanks to you. Katsuki felt embarrassed. He shouldn't have been so rude to him at the start. He was doing his job just like everyone else. Yeah, he replied. Sorry if I was in butt. The detective smirked. I have dealt with worse than a hero with heightened emotions, sir. Have a good night. Recover quickly, Midoriya. As the detective left, Deku turned to Katsuki with a raised eyebrow. What did you say to him? Nothing. If it was nothing, why did you apologize? Katsuki sighed exasperatedly. I was stressed the F out when you were missing. So yeah, I was sort of rude to him. Sue me. Kacchan. I was more concerned with finding you than preserving someone's feelings, alright? Deku smiled softly. Yeah. I'm very grateful, Kacchan. I wasn't sure anyone was going to find me. He met Katsuki's eyes. How did you even realize I was missing? You took my house keys, he stated. Your keys? In that yellow jacket I gave you. I left them in the pocket. Oh my God, really? Yep. I went to your house to get them back and you weren't there. Sorry. Are you seriously apologizing for being abducted, Deku? Well, no dash. Then shut up. Deku, shut up. Katsuki ran his hand through his damp hair and sighed. By the way, I wanted to ask. He put his finger on his sternum. What happened to your chest? Was that them too? Deku grinned, which surprised Katsuki. That tall guy kept using his truth quirk on me and making me spill a bunch of my real thoughts, like saying he wasn't very smart for ignoring the only person in the world who knew the intricacies of the quirk he was trying to steal. He got a little annoyed over hearing the harsh truth. And he cut you? Deku nodded. What a FING pages. Can't stand hearing anything he disagrees with. Deku giggled. Yes, exactly. Kacchan smirked. Does that count as a swear? Absolutely not. It has to come from my mouth, not yours. Katsuki didn't leave Deku's side as he got too tired to sit and requested to lie down on the ambulance stretcher. He stayed as Deku talked to him about his students to distract him from the situation. He stayed as Deku got drowsy and fell asleep properly for the first time in a few days. He stayed when his allies bid him farewell and prayed Deku got better. He stayed as the paramedics piled into the ambulance, and they drove to the hospital. Katsuki didn't let Deku out of his sight for a second. He had Deku again. He wasn't ever going to let go. Izuku didn't hate a lot of things. It was a strong word to use, far too strong to assign to anything so insignificant. But he did dislike plenty of things, and one that was starting to climb his list of things he disliked were hospitals. He had his fair share of visits to hospitals already. He was pretty sure Recovery Girl had a hit out on him already for how many times she saw Izuku in her bay. But that sickeningly sterile feel of the walls, the continuous beeping of various machines and just not knowing whether or not he would come out the same. Hospitals just brought back bad memories. He'd had enough visits for a lifetime. That didn't mean he was going to be a difficult patient. Izuku always did as the doctors told him and complied with their demands. If it weren't for multiple doctors over the years, he would have lost a lot of mobility in his limbs and maybe even his life. So when he was checked into Central Hospital, he was more than complacent. It did help that the place didn't seem so intimidating when he had Katsuki accompanying him. Katsuki had not left his side since he had scooped him out of that chair from where he was held captive. When they arrived at the hospital, and Izuku had to be taken in for a more thorough examination, he had to try and plead with Katsuki to stay in the waiting area since he seemed to be drawn to Izuku's presence like a magnet. After a little bit of convincing, Katsuki reluctantly agreed to leave and wait outside, and Izuku sat in his temporary room while he was checked out. He knew of his obvious injuries, the various cuts from the scalpel and bruises and scrapes he had from being thrown around a bit. He had been lacerated 16 times on his arms and once on his chest, but he was still proud of the fact he managed to get one up over his captors and anger them to such an extent. He had to be on fluids to regain the strength he had lost as a result of the fatigue quirk, and he was too low on blood to be allowed to get out of bed. Most of the cuts he had received were too shallow to have permanent damage, but a few were deep enough that he needed stitches. If there was a single upside, It was that his arms were so heavily scarred already that a few new additions wouldn't really stand out. Izuku also had a mild concussion, which he was told was likely from fainting at his door and hitting his head right before being abducted. Fortunately, everything would heal smoothly if he remained in bed and rested for a few days. He was going to have to stay at the hospital for at least 24 hours, but he could recover at home. Although, when his doctor told him most of the healing could be done in his own bed, Izuku couldn't help but feel sick to his stomach. The place he once considered home was tainted. He wasn't a very paranoid person, but the thought of sleeping in that apartment was unbearable. He would not be able to stay calm and rational without thoughts of if he was being watched, knowing that there were people out there who might have the same delusions as his abductors. Izuku had never once considered himself to be the target of a scheme like this, but he had been completely shaken to his core. How easily he had allowed himself to become vulnerable, and how much danger he was putting others in by simply being related to them. Returning home was not an option. He had a few ideas on what to do when he was released, but there were a few people he had to discuss it with before he decided on anything. That is pretty much all you need to know about your current condition, Midoriya. The doctor, a young but firm woman with dark blonde hair in a bun, looked at him over her glasses. As I said, your injuries will heal on their own as long as you get a lot of rest. You shouldn't have any lasting damage besides a few small scars from your cuts. Izuku nodded. The doctor looked down at her clipboard. Although, this type of incident does often result in a lot of trauma for the abductee. It often results in paranoia and flashbacks, not feeling safe out in the open or even in your own house. I'm not a psychologist, but I'll ask. Are you feeling any of these? Izuku hesitated but nodded again. Yeah. A bit. I understand. We have a lot of partner programs that offer support therapy to victims of abduction to help them get back on track and adjust to their normal life again. I won't lie and say it's an easy process for victims, but the therapists we have are some of the best in the country. Many of them work directly with pros, so they might suit your situation better. Would you like me to put you on the list to see one? Izuku avoided her eyes. Yeah. I'd appreciate it. He'd never done therapy. Even after all he'd been through, he was never someone who felt he could talk to strangers about his problems. After all, most of the issues he'd speak about stemmed from the burden of one for all. So he could only talk to All Might or Katsuki about it. And they were not therapists, not even close. But now, after so many years, and with his quirk no longer being an issue, maybe he could explain the situation to someone. Someone who he didn't know, who had the experience necessary to help him. Consider it done. The doctor looked up from her clipboard and frowned. Now, there are quite a few people out in the waiting area that asked to see you. I don't think you're too mentally unwell to see them, but there are a lot. Do you want me to send them in? Izuku smiled. Yeah, if you could. She adjusted her glasses. Alright, just try to keep the noise down. She left and Izuku saw her shadow through the opaque glass. After a few seconds, he heard dozens of running footsteps, and the door burst open, spilling almost all of Class 1A into the room. Midoriya. The class huddled around his bed, staring down at their friend. He glanced at all their faces, some of which he hadn't seen in a while. He giggled at the thought. If I'd have known that this would get us all together, I would have gotten myself kidnapped sooner, he laughed. Some of his classmates smirked, but the majority of them looked concerned. Well, he seems to be in good spirits, said Kaminari. Are you hurt badly, Deku? Asked Uraraka. Her brown eyes were misty with tears. I'm so mad at myself for being asleep when the call came through. I wish I could have helped you. I'm fine. Izuku lifted his arms, which were wrapped tightly in bandages. This is all the major damage. I'm only here for a day or two. I can't believe that you got kidnapped, Midoriya, sighed Ida. I don't mean this to be rude, but what on earth could they have possibly wanted from a high school teacher? Well, he's not just a high school teacher, said Zero. It's probably because he used to be a pro. Maybe they wanted money or something. Stop talking about him like he's not right in front of you, moron. Katsuki's rough voice cut through the group, and they all turned to look at him. He wasn't crowded around the bed. Instead, he'd walked over to a corner of the room and sat on a small plastic chair, watching everyone else. Izuku met his crimson eyes, but they quickly darted away. Sorry man. If you don't want to talk about it, that's understandable. Shiro put a comforting hand on his shoulder. No, it's okay. I know why they wanted me. He met the gaze of Todoroki, Joe, Kirishima, and Shinso. But to you guys, I didn't get a chance to say thank you properly. So, thank you very much for rescuing me. Kirishima's lip wobbled, and he enveloped Izuku in a warm hug. I'm just so glad you're safe, man. I was so worried when I saw you. We're so happy that you're alive. Yeah, Midoriya, Jiru smiled softly. You gave us quite a fright there. I'm sorry. I won't do it again, he winked. So what did they want from you? Todoroki questioned. Since you said you were okay with talking about it. Izuku sighed. It's so ridiculous. Well, do you remember what happened to Eri when we were in high school? The group solemnly nodded, and Izuku inhaled sharply. Essentially, it was the same thing. They wanted to use my DNA to extract One for All and use it as some sort of power-up drag. But isn't One for All basically dead? Piped up Kaminari, earning him an elbow in the stomach from Ishido. Oh. No, he's right. I don't have it anymore. The embers are 100% gone, and I don't even know if the remnants of it would still be in my system. So, I don't think it would have worked. And I tried telling them it wouldn't, but they didn't want to listen to me. That's so scary, Midoriya, Yaoyorozu shuddered. I'm glad you were rescued before they could do any serious lasting damage to your body. I'll be okay, Izuku reassured her. I really will. The doctor even suggested a good therapist who helps people recover from situations like this. You're so strong, Midoriya, sniffed Kirishima. Man, I can't get over how cool you are. I can't wait for you to be able to come back to. He suddenly stopped dead, and Izuku saw the entire class glaring at Kirishima as if he was about to say something horrible. Even Katsuki got up from his chair. He looked between his friends, confused. Sorry, I meant I can't wait for you to be out of the hospital. Because you're right, you shouldn't have to be kidnapped for us to be able to catch up, haha. He chuckled and clasped his hands together. Yeah, but I know your schedules can be hectic, so don't worry. I don't blame you for being busy. Speaking of which Ida checked his watch and bowed. I am truly sorry, Midoriya, but I must return to the agency. I wish I could have stayed longer, but it's good to see you safe. It's okay, Ida, reassured Izuku. I appreciate you taking the time to check up on me. If you have to go back to work, that's no problem. Class 1A took turns bidding Izuku well. Some gave him a hug on the way out, hoping for a swift recovery. As the door closed, Izuku noticed one person left in the room. Katsuki stayed unmoving from his seat. They stared at each other for a few seconds, and Izuku was the first to open his mouth. Kacchan. Young Midoriya. The door burst open again, and All Might rushed to Izuku's side. Behind him was Aizawa comforting the sobbing Inko Midoriya. All Might. Izuku reached up as his mentor leaned down and gave him a firm hug. I thought you were still overseas. I came right back as soon as I heard what happened. I am so unfathomably sorry this happened to you, son. Izuku felt tears fill his eyes, and he blinked hard. I'm okay now. Thanks to Kacchan and the others for acting so quickly. All three visitors turned to face Katsuki, still sitting motionlessly in the corner. He gave a curt wave. Go on, just pretend I'm not here. Katsuki, Inko had her face buried in her handkerchief, and her eyes were completely bloodshot. She left Aizawa's side and threw her arms around Katsuki, who nearly fell out of his chair in shock. Thank you for saving my son, Katsuki. Thank you for saving Izuku. I don't know what I would have done if She stopped and continued to cry into Katsuki's shoulder, and he awkwardly patted her head in sympathy. It's fine. He's gonna be okay. Inko raised her head and sniffed. She returned to the hospital bed and intertwined her hand with her son's. He's right, Mom, soothed Izuku. I'm gonna recover quickly and be okay. Midoriya, I must accept some responsibility. All Might bowed. I have always tried my best to keep One for All's secret out of the public eye. Even after we were forced to reveal it, some part of me wanted to keep its properties hidden. I should have released everything there was to know about it. This may have been prevented if there wasn't so much misinformation and secrecy surrounding the quirk. All Might, you can't blame yourself for something like that. Izuku cried. Still, I am sorry that you had to experience something so horrific. What exactly has the doctor ordered you to do moving forward? Asked Aizawa. Izuku paused. I can get discharged tomorrow if everything goes smoothly. Most of my injuries will heal with rest. The doctor also recommended a therapy program for people who have been in this situation, so I'll probably have to start doing that. Because he took a shaky breath. I am truly scared. I don't think I can live in that house anymore. I might think about selling it and moving somewhere else. Katsuki lifted his head from his seat in the corner. Aizawa, are my students all right? Asked Izuku. I was so worried that any of them could be targeted due to being connected to me. They're fine. The police filled me in on the main concerns of getting you back by going after someone else close to you. But they've done a thorough background check on the two villains, and it seems very likely they acted alone. We've tightened security measures around the school. You won't be in any danger when you return to work. When you return to work? Izuku wasn't sure that would be happening anytime soon. It wasn't just the mental anguish that returning to UA would put on him. It was the fact he was terrified that any of them could be victims of another attack if it got out that Deku, the quirkless hero, was a teacher of the hero course. He would be unable to protect them if anything did happen, and the thought of stepping into the UA gates was enough to make his heart start racing. Of course, we are in no way pressuring you to rush back to UA, continued Aizawa. You will have all the paid time off you need to recover from this, and we're all on your side if you need support. Izuku nodded. Thanks. I definitely need time. But as long as the kids are looked after, that'll be one less thing to worry about. Aizawa bowed. I'm glad to see you doing better, Midoriya. Please let us know if you need anything. He glanced at All Might, who squeezed Izuku's shoulders supportively. Update us on your condition. And let us know about the moving thing. He flashed a smile and a thumbs up before walking out of the room, shutting the door behind him. Inko sniffed and cupped Izuku's face with her hand. My baby. I'm so relieved you're okay. Thank you for coming to see me, Mom. I'm sorry I've been so bad about visiting. Oh, don't be ridiculous. She leaned in and gave him a proper hug, squeezing him tight. I want you to come over when you get discharged. Stay with me while you decide what to do with your home. She glanced at Katsuki in the corner. And bring Katsuki with you. We can have a nice lunch. You have such a wonderful friend, Izuku. He smiled. I know. Inko sighed and kissed Izuku on the forehead. I'm guessing you two have to talk, so I'll give you some time. I'll call you as soon as I can, Izuku assured her. And I'll drive him over to yours when he's out of here, added Katsuki. Inko beamed, green eyes glistening with tears. Thank you. I love both of you so much. She waved as she left the room. Izuku swallowed the lump in his throat and pushed back tears as he met Katsuki's eyes again. Dark circles were forming under his eyes, and his hands were stuffed into the pockets of the mustard puffer jacket he'd thrown over his hero costume. Izuku knew he hadn't gone home and slept since he had seen him last in the ambulance. You're wearing the jacket, he stated. Katsuki rolled his eyes. Well yeah, I'd look pretty effed dumb waiting around in my hero outfit. I thought it was awesome, Izuku grinned. It is awesome, Katsuki emphasized. But it's not hospital wear, you dweeb. I have some manners. Are your keys in there? Katsuki removed one hand from his pocket and jingled the keys. Right where I left them. He stood up from the chair and walked next to Izuku, leaning his hands against the bed railing. Kacchan, have you slept? Nope. Why didn't you go home while I was getting examined? Didn't feel like it. You have to be tired after last night. Not even a little bit. Be serious. I am. Izuku sighed. Katsuki was stubborn, but so was he. They butted heads a lot when it came to discussions like this. But Izuku knew no matter how healthy he was, as long as he was in the hospital, Katsuki wouldn't let him out of his sight. What are you even doing here? He asked. Making sure you don't drop dead, Katsuki replied. Kacchan, you know I'm fine. I didn't have any major injuries. I am aware. It's not those that I want to keep an eye on. Well then what? You heard me, right? I've already been prescribed therapy by the doctors. You don't have to worry about that. Dumbass. Would you stop worrying about someone just because someone else is already worrying about them? Izuku paused. No, but Dash. I'm watching out for you because I know you better than some loser with a degree who's going to psychoanalyze you for an hour. I know what you're like. You don't care about yourself, you're always jumping into worrying about other people. I Dash. And this is some serious shit. I'm not taking it lightly, Deku. Kacchan, it's not your job to take care of me. Jesus, it's not a job. Katsuki exclaimed. Izuku could tell he was getting more and more frustrated. We are friends, aren't we? Izuku's voice was very small. Yes. Alright. It's not taxing to worry about you. Comes with being friends. You worry about me. I worry about you. Two-way street, and all that bullshit. I just don't think you need to worry as much, argued Izuku. You already have so much on your plate at work and your agency, I'm just another thing to add to that. Deku, you didn't scrape your FING knee. Nobody knew where you were. I lost you went missing. You were kidnapped. I'm fine, I promise, I'll heal Dash. Katsuki slammed his fist down on the hospital bed mattress, making Izuku jump. Dash. Christ, for once in your life, don't dismiss yourself, you self-righteous dumbass. Hot, wet tears formed at the corner of his eyes. They effing tortured you, that is not fine, Deku. You're making it sound worse than it was. I probably won't even have that many scars from the cuts, Dash. That doesn't matter, he shouted. I wouldn't give a shit if they didn't lay a finger on you in that basement. They still kidnapped you. And they did hurt you, so don't pretend that nothing happened to you, for FS sake. You don't have to act like you're okay. Izuku knew Katsuki was coming from a place of concern. But for whatever reason, he just felt compelled to argue. Well, what do you want me to say, Kacchan? I'm sorry that the first thing I thought about down there was the safety of others. I was thinking about my students, and I was thinking about you. I can't help it. Indulge in some FA self-pity or something. Worry about yourself first. Please. That last word struck a nerve in Izuku's chest. He hadn't expected a plea to come out of Katsuki's mouth, and it looked like he didn't expect to say it. Katsuki brought his hand to the bridge of his nose and pinched it tightly. You can't save anyone if you don't take care of yourself first, he said, back to a normal volume. And right now, you have a whole group of people who want to be there for you. Including me. So let us help you get back on track, Deku. Izuku looked down at his bandaged arms. He always acted in service of others first. He had a natural reflex to help those in need, disregarding his own safety. He thought about when Katsuki had been kidnapped by the League of Villains all those years ago. He had wanted to reach out and save him, but he had already shattered his arms. Would things have gone differently if he had cared for his own body? A lot of conflicting thoughts came to his head. I broke my body because I was saving someone else. But I didn't want just to save one person. I want to save everyone I can. He didn't come to a conclusion. That day at school, Koda told me he ran into a man who knew he was my student. Katsuki lowered his hand from his face and looked solemnly at Izuku. I will bet my life it was one of those men who abducted me. I know what you're saying is right, Kacchan. You're usually right about these things. But I can't put my students or anyone else in danger. Katsuki shook his head. You won't. The security around you is going to be FING nuts after this. You can go back to school when you're better and not have to stress about it. I don't know if I can, he admitted. Well, then what are you going to do? I don't know. The two of them were silent for a few moments. Katsuki placed both his hands on his hips. Well, that's fine. You don't have to figure this shit out right now. I'll stick with you until you get your head screwed on properly. Izuku smiled. My hero. Katsuki grinned back. Look, sorry for yelling. Sometimes, you really just need the point to be beaten into your thick skull. Yeah, I know. But so do you. Huh? How many times is it gonna take me now to get you to go home and shower and sleep? The F-dash? You saying I stink? You should have smelt Four Eyes when he ran in here straight from patrol dash. No, Kacchan. But you have probably been awake for over 18 hours. I'm not going anywhere. You're driving me to my mom's, remember? So go home, rest, and come back. You'll feel better. Katsuki lifted his head and stared at the ceiling. He'd been awake for way more than 18 hours, but he wasn't about to tell Izuku that. He closed his eyes and sighed dramatically. Fine. Izuku smiled. Thank you. I promise I'll be right here waiting for you. Yeah. Katsuki put his hand on the door handle and turned around for one last glance. Take care of yourself, nerd. You too, Kacchan.